For 8 years of marriage, I carried the heavy guilt of an empty nursery. I endured the invasive treatments, the whispering relatives, and the silent disappointment of a husband who claimed he desperately wanted a family. Then my husband grabbed a microphone at a crowded country club and proudly announced he had fathered the twins growing inside my own sister. I did not scream. I did not throw my champagne. I calmly handed him divorce papers. He walked away grinning, convinced he had won my house and my wealth. He had absolutely no idea that his own mother was hiding a devastating medical secret that would completely destroy his entire illusion. My name is Abigail, 33 years old, and I work as a corporate restructuring manager. My entire career is built on walking into failing businesses, identifying the toxic assets, and ruthlessly liquidating them. I analyze sunk costs, cut the dead weight, and rebuild from the ashes. I never realized I would have to apply that exact same ruthless strategy to my own family. For the past decade, I was the reliable workhorse. I funded the vacations, paid off the quiet debts, and maintained the polished image my parents desperately craved. My younger sister Brittany, on the other hand, was the undeniable golden child. She was 30 years old, perpetually unemployed, and completely consumed with her own vanity. We were standing at the grand ballroom of the Oak Ridge Country Club, a venue that demanded a $50,000 minimum spend for weekend events. I knew the exact price because the charge had hit my corporate card 2 weeks prior. My mother, Catherine, had cornered me into paying for Brittany's baby shower. Catherine argued that since my womb was essentially a barren wasteland, the very least I could do was finance a proper celebration for the daughter who was actually expanding the family lineage. I agreed to pay not out of sisterly love, but because fighting with Catherine was a poor return on my emotional investment. The ballroom was decorated in sickening shades of pastel green and pink, completely dripping with overpriced floral arrangements and towering ice sculptures. I stood near the back by the gift table, sipping sparkling water and observing the crowd. The room was packed with upper-class socialites, local politicians, and wealthy neighbors my parents wanted to impress. I watched my mother glide through the crowd in her tailored silk suit. She leaned close to a local real estate developer, whispering loudly enough for me to hear. "Abigail is wonderful with numbers," Catherine murmured behind her champagne flute. "She is our little cash cow, always working. But Brittany is the true beauty queen of the family. She has that natural maternal glow. We are just so blessed that at least one of our girls figured out how to be a real woman." I did not flinch. I had built an entire career dealing with hostile board members who threw worse insults before breakfast. I simply took another sip of water and let my eyes drift to my husband. Derek was 35 years old, holding the title of director at a mid-sized importing firm. It was a hollow title that required him to play golf more often than he actually read financial reports. He loved expensive suits, luxury watches, and the sound of his own voice. Derek stood at the center of the room, holding a silver spoon and tapping it against his crystal glass. The sharp ringing sound cut through the chatter of the wealthy guests. The string quartet in the corner immediately stopped playing. All eyes turned toward him. "I want to thank everyone for coming today," Derek said, his voice projecting across the ballroom with an arrogant confidence that made my stomach turn. "We are here to celebrate new life. We are here to celebrate family. But mostly, I am here today to finally live my truth. For 8 long years, I have been trapped in a dead, empty marriage. I have played the supportive husband to a woman who is completely consumed by her corporate spreadsheets and totally incapable of giving me a family." A suffocating silence crashed down upon the room. Women stopped with their glasses halfway to their mouths. Men shifted uncomfortably in their tailored suits. I stood completely still by the gift table, my expression an absolute mask of stone. Derek walked directly over to Brittany. My sister was wearing a clinging designer maternity dress that I had also paid for. Derek grabbed her hand, pulled her close, and wrapped his arm possessively around her waist. He rested his large hand directly on her swollen stomach. "Brittany gave me what a real man actually needs," Derek announced, his voice echoing off the high ceilings as he stared straight into my eyes. "She is carrying my twins. We are done hiding in the shadows. I am the father." A collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. 50 heads whipped around to stare at me, their faces painted with morbid fascination, shock, and pity. Derek reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a thick envelope of folded legal documents, and slammed them onto the nearest table. "Those are divorce papers, Abigail," he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Sign them right now. I am completely done playing house with a barren woman. I want a real wife and a real family." My heart hammered a steady, furious rhythm against my ribs, but my face remained perfectly composed. I expected immediate outrage from my parents. I expected my father, Richard, to march forward and drag the man who had just publicly humiliated his eldest daughter out of the building. Instead, Richard and Catherine rushed forward and positioned themselves directly beside Derek and Brittany, forming a unified wall against me. I did not cry. I did not scream or throw my drink. I analyzed the situation with the cold precision of a crisis manager reviewing a bankruptcy filing. I reached into my black Prada bag, my fingers wrapping around a very specific stack of papers I had prepared days ago. I pulled them out and offered my husband a chilling, razor-sharp smirk. "I brought a gift too, Derek." I stepped forward, my high heels clicking against the polished hardwood floor. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, nobody daring to breathe as I approached the center of the room. I slapped my own stack of heavily tabbed legal documents right on top of his ridiculous divorce petition. "You want a signature?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Consider it done." I pulled out a heavy Mont Blanc fountain pen, clicked the cap off, and signed my name on his documents with smooth, deliberate strokes. I did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. I tossed the pen onto the table and pushed the papers back toward his chest. Derek laughed, a booming, arrogant sound that grated against my ears. He puffed out his chest, clearly thriving on the audience watching his theatrical display of dominance. "You are making this easy, Abigail." "Good," Derek said, pointing a finger at my face. "Now hand over the keys to the house. The $3 million mansion belongs to the mother of my children now. Brittany needs the space for the twins. You can pack your bags and find yourself a cheap apartment downtown." Before I could even respond to his absolute delusion, my mother Catherine stepped forward. Her face was flushed not with shame for her cheating daughter, but with aggressive determination to manage the scandal. "Let us not make a bigger scene than necessary," Abigail Catherine commanded, waving her hand at me as if swatting away a fly. "This is unfortunate, yes, but the damage is already done. Brittany is carrying the future of the Sterling bloodline. You need to be reasonable and do the right thing for this family." "Reasonable," I repeated, looking at the woman who gave birth to me. "Yes, reasonable, my father," Richard chimed in, crossing his arms over his chest. "You always cared more about saving bankrupt corporations than building a home. Derek is a man who needs a proper wife. Your sister needs stability for those babies. We expect you to transfer the title of the house to them by the end of the week. Do not be selfish, Abigail. Give your sister what she needs to raise these children properly." I stared at my parents, absorbing the sheer magnitude of their betrayal. My own mother and father were demanding I surrender my home to the man who had been sleeping with my younger sister. They were actively using my medical struggles as a weapon to force my compliance. This was not a new dynamic. My mind flashed back a decade ago to my freshman year of college. I had worked 3 part-time jobs to afford the deposit for a premium single dorm room near my campus. The day before move-in, Richard and Catherine showed up and demanded I hand the keys over to Brittany. They claimed she needed the better location because she was pledging a top-tier sorority and could not be expected to share a standard room. They forced me to sleep on a friend's sofa for an entire semester while Brittany hosted parties in the room I paid for. They expected me to bow my head and surrender my territory today, just like I did when I was 18. But I was no longer a helpless college student desperate for their validation. I was a corporate executioner. I slowly shifted my gaze away from my toxic parents and looked toward the far corner of the ballroom. Standing completely still near the velvet curtains was Terrence, Brittany's legal husband. Terrence was a brilliant African-American orthopedic surgeon, a man of quiet dignity who worked 80-hour weeks saving lives. We had always shared a silent mutual understanding of the deeply flawed family we had married into. He knew the relentless crushing pressure I faced from my parents, just as I recognized their casual racist microaggressions toward him. Terrence did not scream or throw punches. He did not charge at Derek like a wounded animal. He simply stood there in his custom-tailored suit, looking at the woman he had promised his life to, seeing her true fraudulent nature, finally exposed to the daylight. Terrence caught my eye across the room. The devastation in his posture was heavily masked by a terrifying clinical calm. He gave me a single, barely perceptible nod. An unspoken alliance was instantly forged between the two outcasts of this family. Terrence reached down to his left hand. He pulled off his heavy gold wedding band. He held it over a half-empty glass of champagne left on a cocktail table and dropped it. The sharp clink of the heavy gold ring hitting the crystal glass cut through the suffocating silence of the ballroom. Without uttering a single word, Terrence turned his back on his pregnant wife, pushed open the heavy oak doors, and walked out into the afternoon sun. Derek chuckled, entirely unbothered by the destruction he was causing. He wrapped his arm tighter around Brittany, who was now dabbing at fake tears to garner sympathy from the wealthy onlookers. "Looks like the trash is taking itself out," Derek mocked, looking back at me. "Now the keys, Abigail. I want you out of my house by tomorrow morning." I looked at Derek's smug face. I looked at Brittany's fake tears. I looked at my parents standing proudly beside the two people who had just decimated my marriage. They thought they had won. They thought my silence was the silence of a defeated, broken woman yielding to their demands. I smiled. It was a cold, razor-sharp smile that caused my mother to physically take a step backward. "You want the house, Derek?" I asked, my voice carrying a pleasant, conversational tone that completely unsettled the crowd. "You want the life I built." I picked up my Prada bag and adjusted the strap on my shoulder. "They are all yours," I said, maintaining direct eye contact with my cheating husband. "The house, the cars, the lifestyle. Enjoy every single bit of it, Derek." I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit, my posture perfectly straight and my head held high. Let them have their glorious victory today. Let them celebrate their stolen future in the country club I paid for. They had absolutely no idea that the mansion they were so eager to claim did not belong to the marital estate at all. They had no idea they had just demanded the keys to their own financial slaughter. The paperwork they thought secured their perfect life was actually a legally binding trap, and my true retaliation was just quietly beginning. The heavy double doors of the country club slammed shut behind me, cutting off the suffocating classical music and the frantic murmurs of the guests. The crisp afternoon air hit my face, a welcome contrast to the toxic ballroom. I walked across the manicured lawn toward the valet parking area, my posture perfectly straight, refusing to let any emotion show. The gravel crunched softly under my shoes as I moved away from the disaster. I spent 8 years building a life with a man who viewed my medical struggles as an insult and spent my entire life trying to earn the basic respect of parents who saw me only as a financial resource. Today, those obligations were permanently severed. Before I could reach the paved driveway, the doors burst open again. The sudden noise shattered the peaceful quiet of the landscaped grounds surrounding the building. Derek marched out, his dress shoes striking the concrete with aggressive thuds. He abandoned his pregnant mistress inside to ensure he got the last word. He always needed the last word. "Abigail." He shouted, his voice echoing across the parking lot. "Do not think you can walk away from me with a dramatic exit. You do not get to dismiss me. I am the one discarding you." I stopped walking but did not turn around. I took a breath, centering my focus, and then pivoted to face him. He closed the distance between us, stopping just inches away, invading my personal space to intimidate me. I could smell the stale alcohol mixed with his cologne lingering in the air. His face was flushed with arrogance and champagne. "I am filing for spousal support," Derek sneered, pointing at me. "I know exactly how much your restructuring firm brings in. You think you can hand me the house and walk away clean? My lawyers are going to tear you apart in mediation. I want half of your company. I want half of the investment portfolios." I want every penny I am entitled to after wasting my 30s on a woman who could not even give me a child. I looked at him, truly observing the man I once promised to love. He was wearing a custom Italian suit that I purchased for his birthday. The luxury watch on his wrist was an anniversary gift from me. He was a monument to my financial generosity, yet he stood there convinced he was a self-made titan of industry. "You really think you can fight me in court?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "I do not just think it, I know it." Derek laughed, puffing out his chest. "I was just promoted to vice president of logistics at my firm last week. My new salary puts me in a completely different tax bracket. I have the resources to hire the most vicious, bloodthirsty divorce attorneys in this state. They are going to drag your name through the mud. They will expose you as a negligent, career-obsessed ice queen who drove her husband away. By the time I am done with you, you will be begging me to settle." His confidence was almost comical. He truly believed his new middle management promotion gave him the financial firepower to destroy a woman who literally dismantled hostile corporations for a living. He had spent the last 8 years charging expensive dinners, luxury car leases, and romantic hotel stays with my sister to his company credit card, completely unaware of who actually owned the debt. He thought his vice president title made him untouchable. "You have absolutely no idea what you are dealing with, Derek," I said, maintaining direct eye contact. "You traded a loyal wife for a bankrupt, lazy sister who will drain your bank accounts faster than you can blink. You think Brittany loves you. She loves the lifestyle I provided for you. Without my money, you are nothing but a middle manager with a massive ego and a cheating scandal." Derek's face contorted with sudden violent rage. The smug smile vanished, replaced by a vicious sneer. He took a step closer, towering over me, trying to use his physical size to force my submission. When I refused to step back or look away, his anger boiled over. "You are nothing but a dried-up, bitter shell of a woman," he spat. He leaned forward and spat directly at my feet. The saliva landed on the pristine pavement inches from my designer heels. It was the ultimate gesture of disrespect, a filthy display of the contempt he had clearly been harboring for years. I stared down at the ground, then slowly raised my eyes back to his face. I did not yell. I did not curse at him. I simply offered him a chilling, empty smile. "Goodbye, Derek," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. I turned my back on him for the absolute last time. I handed my ticket to the valet, who had been standing at a safe distance, wide-eyed and silent. The valet quickly brought my black Porsche Panamera to the curb. I tipped him $100 bill, slid into the driver's seat, and closed the door, sealing myself inside the quiet leather-lined cabin. Derek was still standing in the parking lot, his fists clenched at his sides, shouting something I could no longer hear through the soundproof glass. He looked small, pathetic, and utterly oblivious to the hurricane that was currently heading his way. I started the engine. The powerful roar of the Porsche drowned out his muffled shouting. I pulled my phone from my bag and connected it to the car's Bluetooth system. I dialed a highly encrypted number saved in my contacts under a single initial. The line rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered on the other end. "Yes, Miss Abigail," the voice said. "Execute Protocol Alpha Y," commanded, staring at Derek in my rearview mirror as I shifted the car into gear. "Liquidate his illusion." The morning sun cast a bright golden glow over the green lawns of the Oak Ridge Estates. Derek drove his leased Mercedes up the long driveway of the $3 million mansion he mistakenly believed was his. Beside him sat Brittany. She was rubbing her swollen belly and talking loudly about which walls she wanted to knock down to expand the nursery. Behind them, a white moving truck idled loudly. The truck was packed with designer clothes and cheap furniture belonging to Brittany, brought all the way from her rented apartment. They pulled up to the tall wrought iron gates, expecting them to swing open automatically. Instead, they found the grand entrance completely blocked by 3 unmarked black vehicles. 4 tall men in dark tactical gear stood shoulder to shoulder across the paved driveway. Their muscular arms were crossed, looking entirely unbothered by Derek honking his car horn. Derek slammed the luxury car into park and stepped out quickly, adjusting his tailored suit jacket with a loud huff of arrogant annoyance. He marched directly up to the tallest security guard, fully expecting the working man to cower before his supposed corporate authority. "Open these gates right now," Derek demanded, pointing an angry finger directly at the electronic keypad. "I am the legal owner of this luxury property, and I have a large moving truck waiting to unload my belongings. If you do not move those black vehicles immediately, I am calling the local police and having you all arrested for criminal trespassing." The lead security officer, a broad-shouldered man named Commander Stone, did not even flinch at the threat. He slowly reached into his dark tactical vest, pulled out a thick wooden clipboard, and calmly consulted a printed manifest. "You must be Derek Commander Stone," said his deep voice, completely flat and highly professional. "You are definitely not on the authorized access list. In fact, you are specifically listed on the restricted entry roster. I highly suggest you turn that moving truck around before we tow it away at your personal expense." Brittany quickly waddled out of the passenger side of the Mercedes. Her face was brightly flushed with deep indignation. "Do you have any idea who we are?" she shrieked, resting a manicured hand dramatically on her hip. "My sister is Isabella. She used to live here until my powerful husband kicked her out yesterday afternoon. This is our huge house now. We have beautiful babies on the way, and we are moving inside today." Commander Stone looked at Brittany with absolute sheer indifference. He slowly turned his cold attention back to Derek. "Sir, I am going to explain this reality to you exactly one time," Commander Stone said, stepping forward, so his imposing frame cast a dark shadow over Derek. "You do not own this expensive property. You have never owned this expensive property. According to the official county deed and the registered corporate financial filings, this sprawling estate is solely owned by an offshore corporate entity. Isabella holds total executive control of that specific financial trust. Your name appears nowhere on any deed, any mortgage, or any property tax document. You are essentially a long-term temporary guest, and the actual property owner has officially revoked your visiting privileges today." The blood completely drained from the face of my cheating husband. He took a stumbling step backward. His mouth was opening and closing rapidly as his arrogant brain struggled to process the devastating information. "That is physically impossible," Derek stammered, shaking his head in wild denial. "We bought this huge house together after we got married. We picked out the expensive marble countertops together. I live here. My expensive custom suits are hanging inside the master bedroom closet. I am her legal husband. All marital assets are split evenly during a divorce." Commander Stone calmly flipped a crisp white page on his thick clipboard. "Your personal belongings were carefully packed by our sanitation team overnight. They are currently sitting inside heavy-duty black garbage bags at the edge of the property line by the south exit gate. You may collect them on your way back out to the main highway. As for your supposed marital assets, my wealthy client established the offshore company 3 full years before she ever even met you. The massive funds used to purchase this entire estate never mixed with your personal banking accounts. You legally have zero financial claim to this real estate. You are currently trespassing on private land." Brittany desperately grabbed the arm of her husband. Her fake confidence was completely shattering into a million tiny pieces. "Derek, what is this security guard talking about?" she whined, her irritating voice pitching upward in pure panic. "You promised me the house was yours. You confidently told my parents we were moving into the giant master suite today. Tell him to let us inside right now so I can rest." Derek was sweating profusely. The incredibly arrogant facade he wore so proudly at the country club yesterday was rapidly dissolving into sheer, unadulterated panic. He had confidently promised my toxic parents he would provide a highly luxurious life for their golden child. He had proudly paraded around town, acting exactly like a self-made corporate millionaire. He was completely blind to the hilarious fact that his entire lavish lifestyle was a carefully constructed illusion completely funded by my invisible wealth. "Listen to me," Derek whispered desperately. "I am a powerful vice president. I have plenty of cash. I will pay you double whatever Isabella pays you to let us through. We do not accept illegal bribes, sir, Commander Stone stated firmly. Leave immediately, or we will remove you. Swipe this card, Derek yelled, shoving his black credit card forward. Take $50,000 right now. Commander Stone slid the card through his mobile terminal. The machine beeped harshly. The screen flashed red. Your card is declined, he announced loudly. Insufficient funds, Derek screamed in pure terror. That is completely and utterly impossible. I watched the display unfold live on my tablet. I was sitting in the corner booth of a high-end downtown cafe sipping a perfectly brewed espresso. The security cameras I had installed at the estate captured every single moment of his meltdown in stunning high definition. Derek was violently shaking his plastic credit card at my armed security team, his face turning purple. Brittany was sobbing against the side of the leased Mercedes, wiping her ruined makeup onto the expensive leather seats. They looked like spoiled toddlers denied their favorite toys. I smiled, tapped the screen to close the security feed, and slid the tablet into my bag. My morning entertainment was officially over, and it was time to get down to actual business. The heavy glass door of the cafe swung open. Terrence walked inside, bringing a sudden wave of quiet authority into the bustling room. He wore a sharp charcoal suit that fit perfectly, looking every bit the elite surgeon he was. He scanned the room, his dark eyes locking onto my booth. He did not look like a man whose wife just publicly humiliated him and announced she was carrying another man's children. He looked completely composed, dangerous, and ready for war. He slid into the leather booth across from me and ordered a black coffee from the waitress, without even glancing at the menu. We sat in silence, letting the ambient noise of clinking silverware wash over us. We were two betrayed spouses, bound together by the sheer audacity of the people we had foolishly trusted. I assume Derek found out about the house today. Terrence said, his voice a low, steady rumble that commanded instant respect. My security chief turned them away 20 minutes ago, I replied, taking another slow sip of my espresso. Derek tried to bribe them with a credit card that my bank had already frozen. They are currently stranded on the side of the highway with a moving truck full of cheap furniture. Terrence let out a short, humorless laugh. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. He placed it squarely in the center of the table between us. He kept his large hand resting on top of it, his expression hardening into cold steel. I spent the entire night going through our home office, Terrence explained, his eyes locking onto mine. I always knew your sister had expensive tastes. I knew she liked to pretend she was wealthy to keep up with your success. But I thought she was just vain. I had absolutely no idea she was a complete financial parasite. Brittany has been stealing from me for months to fund her secret fantasy life with your husband. I leaned forward. Show me. Terrence opened the folder and pushed a stack of highlighted bank statements toward me. The numbers printed on the pages were staggering. Brittany had secretly opened 3 different high-limit credit cards in his name by forging his signature. The total debt was sitting at exactly $150,000. She had maxed out every single card to the absolute limit. She bought designer bags, custom jewelry, and imported clothing, Terrence said, his voice remaining flat. She even charged multiple weekend stays at a luxury boutique hotel on the other side of town. That must be where she was meeting Derek while I was pulling 80-hour surgical shifts at the hospital. She was using my hard-earned money to make Derek think she was some kind of independent, wealthy socialite. She bought all of those things just to impress your arrogant husband. I scanned the documents, feeling a surge of pure, unadulterated disgust. My sister had not only destroyed her marriage, she had actively tried to ruin her husband financially just to trap mine. Derek, in his infinite stupidity, probably thought he had landed a rich heiress. He had no idea he had simply traded a self-made millionaire for a woman drowning in fraudulent credit card debt. I am filing a police report for identity theft and financial fraud this afternoon, Terrence stated clearly, tapping the bank statements. She forged my signature on the credit applications. I am going to ensure every single penny of this debt is legally assigned directly to her in the divorce. She will be bankrupt before the ink even dries on the final settlement. You should, I agreed. closing the financial folder and sliding it back toward him. They both deserve to feel the absolute crushing weight of their own terrible decisions. Derek lost his house cars and corporate safety net today. Brittany is about to lose her freedom and her financial future. But we are not finished yet, are we? Not even close, Terrence replied. He reached into the very back of the manila folder. The air between us seemed to drop 10 degrees. He pulled out a glossy black and white medical photograph and placed it carefully on the table. It was an ultrasound image. I could clearly see the two tiny shapes of the twins Brittany was so proudly bragging about yesterday. I looked at the image, then back up at Terrence, confused. I already knew she was pregnant. Derek had made that painfully clear to the entire country club. Terrence leaned across the table, his dark eyes burning with a brilliant, vindictive fire. He pointed a long finger at the tiny printed text in the top right corner of the medical photograph. Look at the exact gestational dating, Isabella. Terrence instructed, his voice dropping to a harsh, commanding whisper. Look at the weeks and days calculated by the technician. I narrowed my eyes and read the small print. The math instantly clicked in my head. The timeline does not match Derek's business trip to Miami, Terrence said quietly, sliding the glossy ultrasound photo closer to me across the dark wooden table. I stared intensely at the tiny black and white medical image resting between us. My cheating husband was not just suddenly left homeless and entirely broke. He was blindly claiming fatherhood over another man's unborn children. I slowly looked up at Terrence, my mind rapidly calculating the sheer magnitude of Brittany's absolute deception. She was playing a dangerous game, risking everything for a lavish lifestyle she could never afford. We shook hands firmly across the table, permanently finalizing our unbreakable alliance against the two toxic traitors. I immediately left the busy cafe, got into my car, and drove straight to the downtown branch of Vanguard Horizon Financial. It was finally time to permanently pull the plug on Derek's artificial financial life support. I sat comfortably in the leather chair inside the glass-enclosed office of Julianne, my private wealth manager. We had just finished executing the final documents to completely sever my corporate dividend streams from the marital joint accounts. Julianne poured me a glass of sparkling water, just as a loud commotion erupted on the main banking floor. Through the soundproof glass, I had a perfect view of the teller counters. Derek burst through the heavy brass doors of the bank, his face flushed with panic and anger. He bypassed the line of waiting customers and slammed his black credit card onto the marble counter. Derek violently smacked his hand against the counter, demanding to speak with a senior branch manager immediately. He was loudly complaining about experiencing a humiliating error at the country club earlier that morning and ranting about his frozen checking accounts. He threatened to close his entire portfolio and move his imaginary fortune to a competing financial institution if his cards were not immediately reactivated. The terrified bank teller nervously pressed a silent button beneath her desk. Julianne sighed heavily, picked up her digital tablet, adjusted her suit jacket, and stepped out of the office to handle the disruption. I remained seated comfortably inside the private suite, sipping my cold mineral water, and quietly watching the glorious implosion unfold directly before my eyes. Julianne approached Derek with an expression of polite, professional indifference. I watched his mouth moving frantically as he tried to flex his status as a vice president of logistics. For 8 years, Derek had genuinely convinced himself that his $90,000 annual salary funded our lavish lifestyle. He actually believed his modest middle management paychecks covered the $3 million mortgage, the luxury vehicles, the exotic vacations, and his highly expensive tailored suits. He completely ignored the reality that my silent corporate dividends were heavily subsidizing every single aspect of his inflated existence. He lived paycheck to paycheck, blowing all his own money on expensive golf club memberships and secret hotel rooms with my sister, while my massive, completely invisible wealth kept the sturdy roof over his head. I watched Julianne calmly pull up his profile on her tablet. She tapped the screen a few times and showed it to him. Derek's arrogant posture instantly deflated. His shoulders slumped forward as Julianne systematically explained the brutal reality of his financial situation. She informed him that the primary funding source for his premium accounts had been legally and permanently severed earlier that morning. Without the massive monthly influx of my corporate restructuring bonuses, his account balance was now practically entirely non-existent. The automated payments for his lavish lifestyle had triggered simultaneously on the first of the month, instantly draining whatever meager funds he had personally deposited. Derek began waving his arms wildly, pointing toward the ceiling and demanding access to the emergency credit lines. Julianne simply shook her head. She explained that his personal credit score, stripped of my financial backing, did not qualify for any overdraft protection. The high-limit credit cards he loved to flash at restaurants were entirely dependent on my corporate collateral. When I removed my name as the primary guarantor, the bank immediately flagged his profile as a high-risk liability and froze every single card attached to his name. He was now completely cut off from the wealth he had taken for granted. I could see the exact moment the devastating truth finally pierced his thick skull. Derek aggressively ran his hands through his carefully styled hair, his mouth hanging open in sheer disbelief. He had strutted into the bank expecting to bully a teller into fixing a simple clerical error. Instead, he was being told by a senior wealth manager that he was functionally bankrupt. The illusion of his immense wealth was evaporating into thin air right in the middle of a crowded bank lobby. The other customers in the building were openly staring at him, whispering to each other as the self-proclaimed titan of industry threw a pathetic public tantrum. Julianne reached into her tailored blazer pocket and pulled out a folded piece of official bank stationery. She handed the crisp white paper across the marble counter to my panicking husband. Derek snatched it from her hand, his eyes darting across the printed words. His face turned a sickly shade of pale gray. He looked up at Julianne, his voice carrying loudly across the quiet banking floor. "Insufficient funds!" Derek screamed, crushing the notice in his fist. "That is absolutely impossible. I need my luxury vehicle to get to work." Julianne offered him a tight, unsympathetic smile. She pointed a manicured finger toward the large floor-to-ceiling windows at the front of the bank. Derek turned around slowly, dread washing over his features. Parked illegally in the red zone, directly outside the bank, was his prized Mercedes. A heavy-duty commercial tow truck was currently backing up to the rear bumper of the expensive vehicle. The bank had officially canceled his luxury car lease due to severe non-payment. The repo truck was already outside. I watched the tow truck hook up the silver Mercedes through the bank security feed the manager had discreetly shared with me. I felt a deep sense of satisfaction wash over me as Derek chased after the truck, waving his arms like a madman. My phone buzzed with frantic text messages from my soon-to-be ex-husband, but I simply blocked his number and tossed the device onto my polished glass desk. The financial guillotine had dropped perfectly. I was sitting in my corner suite at the apex of the city skyline, reviewing the liquidation documents for my next corporate target. My private office was a fortress of steel and glass, a highly secure environment, completely impenetrable to anyone without an explicit appointment. That was exactly why the sudden violent crashing sound echoing from my outer reception area immediately caught my undivided attention. The heavy oak double doors of my executive suite violently flew open, striking the wall with a deafening crack. My mother, Catherine, stormed into the room with her face contorted in absolute rage. My father, Richard, followed closely behind her, roughly shoving my terrified executive assistant aside to force his way inside. They had clearly bypassed 3 levels of building security by dropping my name and screaming at the lobby guards until someone let them up. I did not stand up to greet them. I did not show an ounce of intimidation. I simply leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, folded my hands together on my lap, and waited patiently for the inevitable explosion. Catherine marched directly up to my workspace and slammed both of her hands flat against my pristine desk, forcefully knocking over a neat stack of quarterly financial reports. "How dare you!" Catherine shrieked, her voice shrill and completely devoid of any maternal warmth. "Brittany is currently sitting in a cheap, disgusting motel room crying her eyes out. She is carrying your future nieces or nephews, and you had the sheer audacity to send armed thugs to kick a pregnant woman out onto the cold street. You left your own sister completely homeless and entirely broke. You are a monster." Richard stepped forward, pointing a shaking, accusatory finger directly at my face. You are a heartless, vindictive woman, Isabella. Derek called us begging for help because his bank accounts are entirely frozen and his only vehicle was just towed away like he is some kind of common criminal. You are actively trying to destroy the father of our beautiful grandchildren over a simple marital dispute. You should be thoroughly ashamed of yourself. A simple marital dispute, I repeated, keeping my voice dangerously low and remarkably steady. He proudly announced his blatant infidelity in front of 50 people at a country club and arrogantly demanded I hand over my hard-earned assets to his pregnant mistress. He dug his own grave. I merely provided the shovel. You should have compromised. Catherine interrupted, her face turning a bright, angry shade of red as she desperately defended her golden child. We raised you to share with your sister. We just found out you have millions of dollars sitting in offshore accounts that you purposely hid from your own family. You have more than enough liquid cash to buy them a new house and set up a massive trust fund for the unborn twins. Instead, you choose to act like a selfish tyrant. You always cared more about your corporate bank accounts than your own flesh and blood. You have always been jealous of Brittany because she is naturally beautiful and you are just a cold calculator. I stared at the two people who had spent my entire life using me as an emotional automated teller machine while blindly worshipping my deceitful sister. They forced me out of my college dorm room for her. They made me pay for her lavish baby shower. And now they expected me to finance a luxurious life for my cheating husband and his pregnant mistress. Richard slammed his heavy fist against the frosted glass wall of my office. Listen to me very carefully, Isabella. If you do not wire $2 million into Derek's personal account by the end of this business day to secure a safe home for Brittany, you are completely dead to us. We will cut you out of the family will forever. We will erase your name from the heritage. You will not receive a single dime of our massive estate when we pass away. You will be left with absolutely nothing but your cold, empty spreadsheets. The sheer delusion radiating from my father was truly breathtaking. They were trying to threaten me with the promise of a future inheritance, completely unaware of their actual financial reality. They had spent decades projecting an image of old money wealth, hosting lavish dinner parties, and driving leased luxury cars they could barely afford. They thought their suburban mansion gave them the ultimate leverage over my life. They thought the threat of disinheritance would bring me to my knees begging for forgiveness. I slowly reached across my desk and hovered my index finger over the silver intercom button. I locked eyes with my father, letting the icy silence stretch out until the arrogance on his face began to waver into uncertainty. I pressed the button firmly. My chief of security answered immediately through the crisp desk speaker. Yes, Miss Isabella, the security chief said. I need the eviction notice delivered to the Oak Ridge estate immediately, I commanded clearly. Make sure the local sheriff is present to enforce the lockout. My parents looked at each other in utter confusion. The aggressive anger drained from their faces, replaced by a sudden creeping sense of total dread. Richard opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. You mean the family estate that I secretly paid off the mortgage for 5 years ago, I asked, offering them a razor-sharp smile. I am legally foreclosing on it early tomorrow. My parents stood frozen in the center of my office. The blood drained from their faces as the brutal reality of their situation crashed down upon them. They realized their ultimate threat of disinheritance was useless against the person who owned the roof over their heads. I did not wait for their apologies or frantic attempts to negotiate. I simply nodded to my security team. 2 guards stepped forward, grabbed Richard and Catherine, and escorted my speechless parents out of my building. I turned my attention back to my financial spreadsheets, completely unbothered by the toxic trash I had just taken out. Across town, a very different kind of reality was crashing down. The setting was a cheap, dingy motel room located directly next to a noisy interstate highway. The air inside the small room smelled strongly of stale cigarette smoke and cheap industrial cleaner. A neon sign outside cast a harsh red glow through the curtains. Brittany was pacing across the stained carpet, her designer maternity dress looking absurd in the squalid environment. She kicked a plastic trash can across the room, her face twisted into a scowl. "You need to fix this right now, Derek!" Brittany shrieked, pointing an accusing finger at him. "I am carrying your twin babies. I am not spending another minute in this disgusting nightmare. My back hurts, the air conditioning is broken, and I am starving. Call your bank, wire the funds, and buy us a new luxury house today. You told me we were going to live in a mansion. You promised me an incredibly wealthy lifestyle." Derek was sitting heavily on the lumpy mattress with his head buried in his hands. He was still wearing the same custom Italian suit from the country club, but it was now wrinkled and reeked of cheap liquor. He lifted his head, staring at the woman he had blown up his life for. "There is no money, Brittany." Derek said, his voice completely hollow and defeated. "What are you talking about?" Brittany snapped, rolling her eyes in deep annoyance. "You are a powerful corporate vice president. You make plenty of cash. Just call your financial manager and transfer the funds. Stop being dramatic and take care of your girlfriend." Derek sprang up from the mattress, his eyes wide and unhinged. The sheer frustration of the past 24 hours finally boiled over into an explosive rage. "Are you deaf?" he screamed, his voice vibrating off the thin motel walls. "I have absolutely nothing. My bank accounts are completely frozen because Isabella was the one funding them. My luxury car was repossessed this morning because Isabella was the one paying the lease. I have zero savings. I have zero credit. The massive wealth you were so desperately attracted to was never mine. I lived paycheck to paycheck, and my wife subsidized my entire existence. I am functionally bankrupt." Brittany stumbled backward as if she had been slapped across the face. Her mouth dropped open in pure horror. The arrogant, wealthy corporate titan she thought she had successfully stolen from her older sister was actually just a broke middle manager playing dress-up. Her true, shallow nature instantly bubbled to the surface. "You lied to me," Brittany yelled, her voice pitching upward into a hysterical screech. "You paraded around town acting like a self-made millionaire. You bought me expensive dinners and promised the world. I left my incredibly successful husband for you because I thought you could provide a better, richer lifestyle. I thought you controlled all of Isabella's money. You are nothing but a pathetic, broke fraud." Derek stared at her, absolute disgust twisting his features. He was finally seeing the real Brittany. The beautiful, supportive woman who constantly stroked his fragile ego was nothing but a greedy financial parasite. "You only wanted me for my perceived wealth," Derek shot back, his voice dripping with pure venom. "You did not love me. You just wanted access to my bank accounts. I threw away a brilliant, wealthy wife for a shallow gold digger. Isabella built a massive empire, and you cannot even pay your own credit card bills. You are a completely worthless leech, Brittany. You trapped me with this pregnancy just to get your hands on money I do not even have." They stood in the center of the cheap motel room, viciously tearing each other apart. The perfect lovers who had so proudly flaunted their affair at the country club were now drowning in a toxic sea of mutual hatred and crushing poverty. They traded vicious insults, blaming each other for their total destruction, completely oblivious to the heavy footsteps approaching their room. A sharp, authoritative knock echoed loudly against the thin wooden door. Derek and Brittany froze, their screaming match abruptly halted. Derek cautiously stepped forward and pulled the door open fully, expecting to see a motel manager coming to complain about the noise. Instead, Terrence stood in the doorway. The brilliant orthopedic surgeon looked immaculate in a tailored charcoal suit, his posture radiating quiet, dangerous power. He held a thick stack of legal documents in his large hands. He did not look at Derek. His cold, dark eyes locked directly onto his terrified wife. Terrence stepped inside the dingy room, the sheer force of his presence completely suffocating the space. He walked right past a stunned Derek and stopped directly in front of Brittany. She shrank back against the ugly wallpaper, trembling violently under his intense gaze. Terrence slowly raised the stack of documents and pressed them firmly against her chest. "Consider yourself officially served right now," Brittany Terrence said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that echoed throughout the room. "These are your divorce papers. Attached to them is a highly comprehensive civil lawsuit for severe financial fraud and extreme identity theft regarding the $150,000 you maliciously stole from my personal credit accounts. You are going to court. Derek did not stay to watch the rest of the brutal confrontation between Terrence and Brittany inside the cheap motel room. He grabbed his wrinkled suit jacket from the lumpy bed and practically ran out the door. He scrambled down the concrete walkway and frantically waved down a passing taxi on the busy street. His luxury Mercedes was gone, repossessed by the bank, leaving him entirely dependent on public transportation, like the everyday people he openly despised. He slid into the back seat of the cab and barked the address of his logistics company at the driver. He needed to get to his sanctuary. He needed to be back in an environment where he possessed actual authority. Vanguard Global Logistics was his kingdom. He had recently been promoted to Vice President of Supply Chain Operations, a title he believed made him completely untouchable in the corporate world. During the uncomfortable cab ride across the city, Derek formulated a desperate but arrogant plan to save himself. He knew Isabella was a highly resourceful corporate restructuring manager with millions of dollars hidden in offshore accounts. He knew she had the financial firepower to bury him in family court. However, Derek was absolutely convinced he was a ruthless business shark who could easily outmaneuver her. He decided he would march straight into the corporate finance department of his company and demand a massive executive loan. Senior partners frequently took advances on their annual bonuses. He would leverage his newly acquired vice president status to secure an immediate $200,000 cash advance. He would use that corporate money to hire the most vicious, aggressive divorce attorneys in the state. He smiled to himself, feeling his fragile ego slowly inflating again. He was going to use his powerful corporate position to completely destroy his wealthy wife. The taxi pulled up to the sleek glass high-rise building that housed Vanguard Global Logistics. Derek tossed a crumpled $20 bill at the driver and stepped out onto the pristine sidewalk. He aggressively straightened his wrinkled Italian suit, took a deep breath, and pushed his shoulders back. He walked through the revolving glass doors and strode into the grand marble lobby with the heavy, commanding footsteps of a corporate titan. The moment he stepped off the executive elevator onto his designated floor, his toxic management style was on full display. He expected everyone to bow down to his authority. Derek marched past the main reception desk and slammed his fist against the counter. He glared down at the young receptionist, a girl fresh out of college who looked immediately terrified of him. "Where is my morning coffee?" Derek snapped, his voice echoing sharply down the quiet office corridor. "I specifically requested a double-shot espresso to be waiting on my desk by 9 o'clock every single day. Do you lack basic comprehension skills, or are you just entirely incompetent at your incredibly simple job?" The young receptionist stammered and apologized frantically, reaching for her desk phone to order his beverage. Derek scoffed loudly, rolling his eyes in absolute disgust. He loved belittling the junior staff. It made him feel powerful, especially after experiencing such massive humiliation at the country club and the bank earlier that week. He continued walking down the hallway, aggressively snatching a printed logistics report from the hands of a passing junior analyst. Derek glanced at the front page of the document and immediately threw the entire folder onto the carpeted floor. "These quarterly projections are completely useless," Derek shouted at the trembling analyst. "I told you to manipulate the shipping margins to make our department look highly profitable before the board meeting next week. I do not pay you to be honest. I pay you to make me look exceptionally good. Pick that garbage up and completely redo the numbers before lunch, or I will fire you and make sure you never work in this industry again." The junior analyst dropped to his knees, frantically gathering the scattered papers while apologizing profusely. Derek stepped directly over the kneeling man, feeling a massive surge of adrenaline rushing through his veins. This was exactly where he belonged. He was a dominant force of nature. He was a powerful executive who controlled the lives and careers of dozens of employees. Isabella might have her secret offshore bank accounts and her fancy private security teams, but Derek had genuine corporate power. He was going to walk into the finance department, demand his massive cash advance, and wipe that cold, condescending smirk right off his wife's face. He turned the final corner of the executive corridor and approached the heavy mahogany door of his private corner office. His name was proudly engraved on a shiny silver plaque mounted directly at eye level. Derek, Vice President of Supply Chain Operations. He reached out and grasped the cool brass handle. He turned the knob, pushed the heavy wooden door open, and confidently stepped inside his private sanctuary. Derek instantly froze in his tracks. The arrogant smile completely vanished from his face. All the air was violently sucked out of his lungs. He was not alone in his office. Sitting comfortably behind his massive custom oak desk, casually occupying his expensive ergonomic leather executive chair, was Isabella. She was wearing a razor-sharp, tailored black designer suit, looking like an absolute corporate executioner. Her posture was perfectly straight, and her hands were folded neatly on top of the desk. Standing rigidly on her left side was a stern man in a dark gray suit holding a thick financial ledger. Standing on her right side was an older woman holding a digital tablet displaying severe red warning graphics. Derek stared at the three people invading his private workspace, his mind completely unable to process the terrifying scene unfolding before him. "Hello, Derek," I said smoothly, offering him a chilling, empty smile. "Meet the senior corporate auditors. Take a seat." Derek stood completely paralyzed in the doorway of the executive office. His hand was still rigidly gripping the cool brass doorknob. The arrogant swagger he carried through the lobby had instantly evaporated, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. He blinked rapidly, his eyes darting from the stern man in the dark gray suit, holding the thick financial ledger, to the older woman with the digital tablet, and finally back to me. He was struggling to comprehend how his estranged wife had successfully bypassed building security and installed herself behind his prestigious mahogany desk. "What kind of sick joke is this?" Derek demanded, his voice cracking as he finally released the doorknob and took a hesitant step inside. "Get out of my chair right now, Isabella. You cannot just waltz into Vanguard Global Logistics and pretend you own the place. I am the Vice President of Supply Chain Operations here. This is a highly secure corporate environment, not your personal playground. I am calling building security to have you arrested for trespassing and corporate espionage." I did not move a single inch. I simply gestured toward the two empty leather chairs positioned directly in front of the desk. "You do not need to call security, Derek," I replied, my tone dangerously calm. "They are already standing right outside the door waiting for my direct orders, and I strongly suggest you sit down before you completely embarrass yourself in front of my appointed financial investigators." Derek scoffed loudly, attempting to mask his growing terror with a forced display of masculine bravado. He marched forward and slammed his hands onto the edge of the desk, leaning aggressively toward my face. "Your investigators," Derek sneered. "You are absolutely delusional. You manage restructuring for failing businesses, Isabella. Vanguard Global Logistics is a massive, highly profitable international shipping corporation. You have absolutely zero authority in this building. I am a top-tier senior executive, and you are currently violating federal corporate laws by accessing my private workstation." The stern man standing to my left let out a short, highly professional sigh. He opened the heavy financial ledger and placed it squarely on the desk between us. The older woman tapped her digital tablet, projecting a complicated corporate organizational chart onto the large monitor mounted on the office wall. "Derek, allow me to officially introduce you to reality," I said, leaning back in the ergonomic leather chair and steepling my fingers. 6 months ago, my crisis management firm identified a massive vulnerability in the parent company that owns Vanguard Global Logistics. We executed a highly aggressive, completely silent corporate buyout. I am not trespassing in your office. As the principal stakeholder and the new acting chief executive officer of the parent conglomerate, I technically own this entire skyscraper. You are standing on my carpet, breathing my air, and collecting a paycheck signed by my corporate entity. I am your ultimate boss." The last drop of color vanished from his face. Derek stumbled backward, his legs suddenly giving out beneath him. He practically collapsed into the leather guest chair, staring at the organizational chart glowing brightly on the monitor. My name was positioned at the very top of the corporate hierarchy, completely overshadowing his pathetic middle management title. That is impossible, Derek whispered, his voice trembling violently. You would have told me about an acquisition this massive. We were married. We were married, I corrected sharply. But you were far too busy orchestrating a deceitful affair with my lazy, bankrupt sister to ever notice what I was doing at the office. You thought I was just crunching boring numbers while you were playing the role of a corporate king. You severely underestimated me, Derek. But your ignorance is not even the most entertaining part of this meeting. I nodded to the older woman holding the tablet. She tapped the screen, changing the display to a long, detailed list of expense reports. I turned the monitor slightly so Derek could get a perfect, unobstructed view of his own impending destruction. As part of the recent corporate buyout, I ordered a comprehensive forensic audit of all executive spending. I explained, keeping my voice completely clinical. We discovered some highly fascinating trends in your designated department. For the past 6 months, you have been aggressively charging extremely romantic high-end hotel stays to your company corporate credit card. Derek began to physically shake in the chair. His eyes widened in absolute horror as he recognized the names of the luxury boutique hotels listed on the glowing screen. You categorize these extravagant weekend getaways as crucial client entertainment and logistics partner summits? I continued my gaze, locking onto his terrified face. The auditors meticulously tracked every single receipt, every room service order, and every expensive bottle of champagne. You were illegally embezzling thousands of dollars from your employer to finance your disgusting affair with Brittany. You were quite literally stealing from my newly acquired company to cheat on me with my own sister. That was a mistake, Derek pleaded, lifting his hands in a desperate, pathetic gesture of surrender. I can pay the company back. I will use my annual bonus. I am a valuable vice president, Isabella. You cannot destroy my entire career over a few mismanaged expense reports. You are not a vice president, I stated coldly. You are a fraudulent liability who just committed severe corporate embezzlement. That is a federal crime. Your employment is officially terminated effective immediately for gross misconduct. Derek gasped, tears of panic welling in his eyes. Please, Isabella, he begged. Just let me pack my things. Let me gather my personal belongings. I pressed the intercom button on the desk. Security, I said clearly into the microphone. Escort Mr. Derek right out of this corporate building. He does not even get to keep the cardboard box. 2 massive security guards entered the executive office mere seconds after I gave the command over the intercom. They did not gently ask my cheating husband to leave. They grabbed Derek by both of his arms, hauled him entirely out of the ergonomic leather guest chair, and aggressively frog-marched him straight toward the heavy mahogany doors. Derek kicked and thrashed wildly, screaming about his rights, his executive status, and his impending lawsuits. The corporate auditors sitting in my office did not even blink. I simply picked up my expensive fountain pen and began reviewing the next financial file resting on my desk. Out in the corridor, the humiliation was absolute. Every single junior analyst, receptionist, and middle manager that Derek had ruthlessly bullied over the past 6 months was now standing in the hallway, openly watching his highly public downfall. The young analyst he had berated earlier that morning watched with wide eyes as the former vice president of supply chain operations was dragged past the cubicles. Derek demanded they unhand him, but his voice cracked in sheer panic. The security team pushed him into the freight elevator, bypassing the polished executive lifts he loved to use. They hauled him through the loading dock and shoved him directly out the heavy metal service doors. He stumbled onto the hot, dirty concrete of the back alley, nearly tripping over a rusted dumpster. He was officially locked out of his kingdom forever. Derek stood in the filthy alleyway, breathing heavily. His custom Italian suit was wrinkled and stained with sweat. He reached into his pocket for his car keys, only to violently remember his luxury Mercedes had been repossessed hours ago at the bank. He checked his banking app on his phone, confirming a zero balance. He had no cash for a taxi. He had no credit cards for a rideshare service. The mighty corporate titan was forced to walk 3 miles in the blistering afternoon heat to catch a crowded public bus back to the wealthy suburbs. An hour later, Derek trudged up the pristine brick walkway of a sprawling, heavily manicured suburban home. This large house belonged to his mother, Patricia. Patricia was a status-obsessed woman in her early 60s who desperately clung to the illusion of old money wealth, despite her late husband leaving behind a mountain of secret debt. Derek aggressively banged his fist against the ornate front door. He did not have to wait long. Patricia swung the door open, wearing a cashmere sweater set and a string of authentic pearls. She took one single look at her golden child, seeing his disheveled hair, his sweaty suit, and his wild, bloodshot eyes. She immediately gasped, pulling him inside her perfectly decorated foyer and rapidly locking the heavy door securely behind them. "What on earth happened to you today?" Patricia shrieked nervously, fussing over his wrinkled collar and vigorously brushing imaginary dust from his shoulders. "You look like you were brutally attacked in the street. Did someone try to mug you outside your office?" "Isabella happened." Derek snarled violently, shrugging off her hovering hands. "She completely set me up, Mom. She bought the parent company of Vanguard Global Logistics. She fired me. She froze my bank accounts. She even had my car towed away. I am completely broke." Patricia gasped loudly, pressing a manicured hand against her chest. "I always knew that woman was a venomous snake," Patricia declared, her voice dripping with pure, unadulterated hatred. "I clearly warned you on your wedding day, Derek. I told you Isabella was far too ambitious. A woman who cares that much about corporate spreadsheets and financial dominance will never be a proper submissive wife. She always thought she was better than us just because she made more money. I knew she was a cold, calculating machine." Derek paced aggressively across the expensive Persian rug in the living room. "I need your urgent help, Mom," he demanded, stopping to point a firm finger at her. "I need you to liquidate some of your retirement portfolios right now. I need a massive cash injection to hire a team of elite corporate lawyers. I am going to sue Isabella for everything she owns. I am going to claim massive spousal support, emotional damages, and wrongful termination. She thinks she can just throw me out into the street like garbage. I will absolutely destroy her entire empire. I just need you to fully finance my legal war chest immediately." Patricia hesitated, her hands nervously twisting the pearl necklace resting against her collarbone. The grand illusion she projected to her wealthy neighbors was entirely dependent on a very tight, highly restricted monthly budget. "Derek, darling, you know I fully support you," Patricia said, her voice dropping to a cautious, uneasy register. "But hiring elite corporate lawyers requires hundreds of thousands of dollars in upfront retainer fees. My financial assets are tied up in long-term trusts. Liquidating them right now would incur massive tax penalties. Are you absolutely certain we cannot negotiate a private settlement with her first?" Derek stared at his mother, his frustration rapidly boiling over. He desperately needed to secure her absolute loyalty. He needed her to blindly open her checkbook and fund his desperate revenge plan against his wildly successful wife. He needed to give her the one thing Isabella had utterly failed to provide during their 8 years of marriage. He needed to present her with the ultimate family prize. Derek stepped closer to his mother, softening his angry expression into a triumphant, arrogant smirk. He reached out and gently grabbed her trembling shoulders. "You do not need to worry about Isabella anymore," Derek said, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "I have finally upgraded my entire life, Mom. I am finally with a real woman who actually respects me. I am with Brittany now." Patricia blinked rapidly, her brow furrowing in deep confusion. "Derek, at least I am giving you grandchildren, Mom." Isabella was completely barren. Derek stood tall in the center of the lavishly decorated living room, his chest puffed out with absolute masculine pride. He expected a massive wave of maternal validation. He waited eagerly for Patricia to throw her arms around his neck, to praise his virility, to celebrate the ultimate destruction of his supposedly flawed wife. He had finally provided the one prize this status-obsessed family valued above all else. He was gifting her the next generation of their legacy. Patricia did not smile. She did not step forward to embrace her golden child. She was holding a delicate hand-painted antique teacup, a priceless family heirloom she only brought out for special occasions. Her fingers adorned with heavy diamond rings suddenly went completely slack. The expensive porcelain slipped right through her frozen grasp. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp, violent crack, shattering into dozens of jagged little pieces. Hot, dark tea splashed across the pristine Persian rug, staining the expensive fabric, but Patricia did not even flinch. Her face drained of all color, transforming into a sickly, ghostly shade of chalk white. Her knees buckled slightly, forcing her to grab the edge of a mahogany side table just to keep herself standing upright. She began to tremble violently, her entire body shaking, as if she had just been struck by a massive bolt of lightning. Her wide, terrified eyes stared directly at her son's arrogant, smiling face. "Mom." Derek asked, his smug expression faltering into genuine confusion as he looked down at the shattered porcelain scattered across the floor. "What is wrong with you? I just told you I am having twins. You are going to be a grandmother. You should be breaking out the vintage champagne, not breaking the good china." Patricia could not breathe. The air in the expensive suburban living room had suddenly become thick and entirely suffocating. A massive, crushing wave of sheer panic slammed into her chest. The boastful words her son just yelled echoed endlessly inside her mind. He believed he was going to be a father. He genuinely, confidently believed the two babies growing inside Brittany belonged to him. Her mind violently ripped itself away from the present moment, dragging her forcefully back through time. She was no longer standing in her perfect, quiet suburban foyer. She was instantly transported back to a sterile, brightly lit hospital room exactly 20 years ago. Derek was just 14 years old back then. He had contracted a severe, highly aggressive strain of the mumps. The terrible virus had rapidly escalated, leading to agonizing complications that required immediate emergency surgery. Patricia vividly remembered sitting in that uncomfortable plastic hospital chair, clutching a crumpled tissue, waiting for the head surgeon to walk through the heavy wooden doors. She remembered the solemn, pitying look on the old doctor's face when he finally sat down beside her. She remembered the exact, devastating medical terminology he used to describe the permanent, irreversible damage the aggressive infection had caused to her teenage son's body. The doctor had looked her straight in the eyes and delivered a flawless, absolute medical certainty. Derek would never father biological children. He was rendered 100% permanently sterile. There was absolutely zero margin for error, zero chance of a miracle, and zero hope for future medical intervention. Patricia had made a crucial, defining choice that very same day in the hospital. She looked at her sleeping teenage son, so full of fragile masculine pride, and decided to bury the truth. She sealed the medical records away in a hidden vault. She convinced herself she was protecting him from a lifetime of feelings of inadequacy. She protected his massive ego at all costs, letting him grow into a fiercely arrogant man who constantly bragged about his future legacy. When Derek became engaged to Isabella, Patricia knew the buried secret would eventually destroy his marriage. So she did what she always did. She manipulated the situation to protect her golden boy. 3 weeks before the wedding, Patricia cornered Isabella in a quiet bridal suite. She handed her the sealed medical files and tearfully begged the brilliant corporate manager to protect Derek's fragile pride. She pleaded with Isabella to take the heavy blame, to let the world believe her own body was failing, so Derek could keep his inflated ego intact. Isabella, acting out of a deep, misguided sense of loyalty and love, had agreed to carry that terrible, humiliating burden in absolute silence for 8 long years. And now Derek was standing right in front of her, proudly claiming he had successfully impregnated his mistress. "Mom," Derek said louder, stepping carefully over the spilled tea and shattered porcelain to grab her shaking shoulders. "You are acting completely insane. Did you hear what I just said? Brittany is pregnant with my twins. We are going to have a beautiful family. Isabella was the broken one, not me. You should be down on your knees thanking me for saving our family bloodline from that ambitious corporate robot." Patricia stared into her son's eyes. The horrific, undeniable truth crashed down upon her with the destructive force of an avalanche. If Derek was completely biologically incapable of producing children, then the woman he had just blown up his entire life for was hiding a massive, unforgivable lie. Brittany was carrying twins, but they absolutely did not belong to the man standing in this foyer. Her golden boy had just thrown away a loyal, self-made billionaire wife who had protected his deepest insecurities for nearly a decade. He traded a woman who quietly guarded his dignity for a bankrupt, deceitful fraud who was actively carrying another man's babies. The sheer monumental scale of his catastrophic mistake was completely paralyzing. Patricia felt the room spinning violently around her. She looked up at her extremely arrogant, entirely clueless son. Her voice cracked under the heavy weight of the reality. Patricia whispers, "Wait, she did not tell you." Derek frowns. "Tell me what?" "Tell me what Mom," Derek demanded, grabbing her shoulders. "I just told you that my beautiful new girlfriend is carrying my twin babies. I am finally going to be a father. I am securing the family bloodline. Why are you staring at me like somebody just died?" Patricia could barely breathe. The luxurious living room suddenly felt like a trap. She looked at her son, her golden child, who had spent the last 8 years aggressively blaming his successful wife for their empty nursery. He had publicly humiliated Isabella. He had strutted around town complaining about her corporate ambitions and her supposed biological failures. And he had done it all while entirely oblivious to his own medical reality. "Derek, please sit down," Patricia pleaded, her knees shaking so violently she had to lean her entire weight against the mahogany side table. "You are scaring me. You need to sit down right now." "I am not sitting down until you explain what is going on," Derek yelled, throwing his arms up in the air. "What did Isabella not tell me? Did that vindictive woman steal something else from us? Did she freeze your retirement accounts too?" "She did not steal anything from you," Patricia cried out, tears finally spilling over her carefully applied makeup. "She gave you everything. She gave you your manhood, and you just threw her away for a complete lie." Derek froze. His arms dropped slowly to his sides. The absolute certainty in his mother's voice pierced through his thick layer of arrogance. "What are you talking about?" Patricia took a ragged, shuddering breath. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to say the words she had kept buried for 2 decades. "Do you remember when you caught that aggressive strain of the mumps?" Patricia asked. Derek blinked, completely thrown off by the sudden shift in topic. "Of course I remember. I was hospitalized for 2 weeks. I had emergency surgery because the infection spread. It was pure agony." "But what does a childhood virus have to do with Isabella and my new twins?" "It has absolutely everything to do with it," Patricia sobbed, covering her face with her trembling hands. "The doctors pulled me into a private consultation room after your surgery. They ran extensive tests. The infection caused severe, irreversible damage to your reproductive system. The head surgeon looked me right in the eyes and told me the devastating truth. You are 100% permanently sterile, Derek. You have zero biological capability of ever fathering a child." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Derek stared at his mother, his brain violently rejecting the information. "You are lying," Derek snapped, shaking his head rapidly. "That is completely insane. I am perfectly healthy. I am a strong, capable man. You are just confused. The doctors made a mistake." "They did not make a mistake," Patricia wailed loudly, aggressively, grabbing his suit jacket. "They ran the tests. I made them verify everything because I was so terrified of how the news would destroy you. I knew how much pride you had. I knew you always dreamed of carrying on the family name. I made the conscious decision to protect your fragile ego. I took the medical files, locked them in a safety deposit box, and vowed never to tell you." Derek stumbled backward. He shook his head back and forth, his face twisting into an ugly mask of denial. "No," Derek shouted. "If I am sterile, then why did Isabella spend the last 8 years going to fertility clinics? Why did she take all those hormone injections? Why did she sit there and let me blame her for our empty house?" "Because I begged her to do it," Patricia confessed, dropping to her knees on the stained Persian rug. "3 weeks before your wedding day, I pulled Isabella aside into a private room. I handed her your sealed medical files. I showed her the absolute proof of your condition. I fell to my knees and I begged her to protect your pride. I told her the truth would completely break you. Isabella loved you so much back then. She looked at those medical files, folded them up, and promised me she would take the heavy blame. She willingly accepted the horrific label of being infertile just to shield your fragile masculinity from the world. The air was violently sucked out of the room. Derek stopped moving. The sheer magnitude of his wife's ultimate sacrifice crashed into his brain like a runaway freight train. Isabella, the powerful corporate restructuring manager, the self-made millionaire, the woman he had just publicly humiliated at a country club, had endured 8 years of invasive medical procedures and vicious family gossip, all to protect a secret she did not even own. She had silently absorbed his cruel insults, his arrogant demands, and his blatant infidelity, never once using the ultimate weapon she held in her hands. She had protected him from his own deep inadequacies. Derek felt a sickening, freezing sensation start at the base of his spine and slowly crawl its way up to his neck. His mother was still sobbing on the floor, babbling apologies, but he could no longer hear her. The sound of his own racing heartbeat was completely deafening. He stared blankly at the wall, his mind frantically putting the horrific pieces of the puzzle together. His mother had saved the medical files. Isabella had known the absolute truth for a decade. He was medically, undeniably, permanently sterile. He possessed absolutely zero capacity to create human life. Derek slowly lowered his gaze to his trembling hands. His breath caught sharply in his throat as the final devastating realization hit him. The entire foundation of his false reality was violently shattering into pieces. He fell hard to his knees, collapsing right next to his weeping mother. "If I am completely sterile," Derek whispered out loud, his voice cracking in sheer terror, "whose babies are in Brittany's stomach?" Derek did not wait for his mother to offer another pathetic apology. He scrambled to his feet, his knees aching as they scraped against the cold, polished hardwood floor. The crushing realization that he had thrown away a billionaire wife for a pregnant fraud ignited a violent, burning rage in his chest. He shoved past Patricia, completely ignoring her frantic, loud sobbing, and marched straight out the front door. He did not have his luxury car anymore. He had to run 3 long, exhausting blocks to a busy intersection just to hail a passing taxi. He threw himself into the back seat and barked the address of the cheap motel at the driver. The ride felt like a terrifying eternity. He stared blindly out the dirty window, his mind aggressively replaying every arrogant boast he had made at the country club. He had proudly claimed those unborn twins in front of 50 wealthy guests. He had demanded Abigail surrender her $3 million mansion to provide a home for children that were not even his. He had completely destroyed his marriage, his career, and his financial security for a woman who was playing him for an absolute fool. The taxi violently lurched to a halt in front of the rundown motel building. Derek tossed his last $20 bill at the driver and practically kicked the door open. The neon sign above the motel office flickered with a harsh buzzing sound. He ignored the strange looks from people loitering in the parking lot and sprinted toward room 214. The humid air clung to his wrinkled suit, but he did not care. He reached the flimsy wooden door and did not bother knocking. He grabbed the handle, turned it sharply, and threw his entire body weight against the door. It banged loudly against the interior wall. Brittany shrieked in absolute terror, jumping back from the small kitchenette area. She was wearing a cheap silk robe holding a plastic cup of water. She dropped the cup, spilling water all over the stained, heavily worn carpet. Derek stormed inside and slammed the door shut behind him. His chest heaved with heavy, ragged breaths. He glared at Brittany, his eyes wide and completely unhinged. She took a terrified step backward, her back pressing against the ugly floral wallpaper. "What is wrong with you?" Brittany demanded, her voice shrill and trembling. "You cannot just burst in here like a maniac. I am carrying your babies." That single sentence sent Derek completely over the edge. He lunged forward, grabbing a cheap ceramic lamp off the rickety nightstand. He hurled it violently against the far wall. It shattered into 100 jagged pieces, sending the lampshade rolling across the floor. Brittany screamed again, covering her face with her hands. "Do not ever say those babies are mine!" Derek roared, pointing a shaking finger directly at her swollen stomach. "My mother just told me the horrific truth. I had a severe infection when I was 14 years old. The complications required emergency surgery. I am 100% permanently sterile. I have absolutely zero biological capacity to father a child. Abigail knew the whole time and kept her mouth shut to protect my pride. So I am going to ask you one single time, Brittany, whose babies are growing inside of you right now? Brittany froze, the color completely draining from her heavily manicured face. For a fraction of a second, absolute panic flashed in her eyes. But she was a master manipulator. She quickly adjusted her posture, letting her shoulders slump forward as she forced a fresh wave of tears to spill down her cheeks. She placed both hands protectively over her stomach and let out a loud, dramatic sob. "You are scaring me, Derek," she cried, taking a slow step toward him. "Your mother is lying to you. She always hated me. She just wants to ruin our perfect relationship because she is jealous. Those doctors make stupid mistakes all the damn time. Beautiful miracles happen to good people every single day. You know perfectly well I have only been with you. You are the only real man I have ever loved. I left my wealthy husband for you because I knew we were soulmates." She reached out, trying to touch his chest, hoping to stroke his fragile ego the way she always did. "You are the father of these twins, Derek. You have to believe me. Do not let your bitter mother and your jealous sister destroy our beautiful future together." Derek swatted her hand away, utterly disgusted by her pathetic attempt to gaslight him. He was a colossal fool, but he was not that stupid. His mother had kept those medical files locked in a vault for 2 decades. Abigail had endured years of invasive fertility treatments just to keep the lie alive. The medical reality was absolute. "You are a disgusting, manipulative liar," Derek spat, stepping closer to corner her against the wall. "You maxed out your husband's credit cards to buy designer clothes just to impress me. You pretended to be a wealthy socialite when you were secretly drowning in massive debt. And now you are trying to convince me that a medical impossibility is a miracle just so I will finance your pathetic life. Tell me the absolute truth right now." Before Brittany could open her mouth to spin another ridiculous lie, the rusted handle of the motel bathroom door slowly turned. The door creaked open, revealing Terrence standing casually in the dim light of the small, humid bathroom. The brilliant orthopedic surgeon looked completely out of place in the cheap motel, wearing his pristine charcoal suit. He stepped out of the bathroom holding a very thick manila folder tightly in his left hand. Terrence looked at Derek with cold, calculated amusement. "The doctors were not wrong," Terrence said, his deep voice cutting right through the heavy tension in the room. "But I found the real father." Derek whipped his head around his eyes, locking onto the tall, imposing figure of the brilliant orthopedic surgeon standing in the doorway of the dingy motel bathroom. Terrence did not look like a man whose entire marriage had just collapsed. He looked like an absolute executioner delivering a final, fatal verdict. He walked slowly into the center of the cramped room, his expensive charcoal suit a stark contrast to the stained carpet and peeling floral wallpaper. He held the thick, heavily loaded manila folder loosely in his strong left hand, continuously tapping it rhythmically against his thigh. Brittany let out a high-pitched, desperate gasp. She scrambled backward until her shoulders hit the wall, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. "Terrence, what are you doing here?" Brittany cried out, her voice shaking violently. "You need to leave right now. You are violating my privacy." "Your privacy vanished the second you maxed out my credit cards to fund your pathetic double life," Terrence replied, his tone remaining terrifyingly calm and completely clinical. "But we are not here to discuss your massive financial fraud right now. We are here to discuss biology timelines and your absolute inability to tell the truth." Terrence stopped right next to the lumpy mattress. He flipped the heavy folder open and pulled out a stack of colorful photographs. He tossed them casually onto the bed. They fanned out across the cheap floral bedspread. Derek immediately stepped forward, his eyes darting down to the glossy images. The photographs were crystal clear. They showed Brittany clinging to the arm of a heavily muscled, much younger man wearing a tight athletic shirt. They were laughing together outside a local inexpensive gym facility. Another photo showed them kissing passionately in the front seat of a beat-up, rusted sedan. "Meet the actual father of those miraculous twin babies," Terrence announced, pointing a steady finger at the young man in the pictures. His name is Bradley. He is exactly 22 years old. He works as a part-time fitness trainer at that cheap gym you mysteriously joined 6 months ago. He also currently shares a tiny rundown apartment with 3 other roommates, and he declared personal bankruptcy last year after a failed cryptocurrency investment. Derek stared at the photos, his brain struggling to process the devastating new information. He looked up at Brittany, his face twisting in sheer disbelief. "You slept with a broke gym trainer?" Derek asked, his voice cracking under the immense weight of the humiliation. Terrence did not let Brittany answer. He stepped closer to Derek, forcing the defeated middle manager to listen to the entire brutal reality. "She did not just sleep with him," Terrence explained, his dark eyes locking onto Derek. "She actively carried on an affair with him for months, but then she got pregnant. She panicked because she realized her young athletic lover did not have a single penny to his name. She knew I was already growing suspicious of her massive credit card debt, and she knew a divorce would leave her completely destitute. She desperately needed a new target to trap. She needed a man she believed possessed immense, unlimited wealth. She needed someone incredibly arrogant, exceptionally vain, and profoundly stupid." Terrence paused, letting the silence stretch out before delivering the final crushing blow. "She picked you, Derek. She staged the entire romance with you. She fed your massive ego, stroked your vanity, and convinced you that you were a corporate titan. She happily let you parade her around the country club because she honestly thought you controlled Isabella and her massive offshore fortune. You were nothing but a convenient, gullible wallet to pay for another man's children." The absolute, undeniable truth slammed into Derek with the destructive force of a wrecking ball. The beautiful, supportive woman he thought he had stolen from his wife was actually a calculating, desperate predator who had completely played him for a fool. Brittany suddenly snapped. The fragile, crying victim facade violently shattered into a million pieces. She pushed herself off the wall, her face contorting into an ugly, furious sneer. "It is all Isabella's fault!" Brittany screamed, her voice shrill and echoing wildly around the small motel room. Isabella always had everything. She had the perfect grades, the brilliant career, the massive offshore bank accounts, the huge $3 million mansion. Our toxic parents always secretly relied on her money while treating me like a decorative doll. I deserved that luxurious lifestyle. I deserved to live in a sprawling estate and drive a pristine Porsche. Isabella forced me to scheme and claw my way up to get what I was rightfully owed. I just wanted my fair share of the wealth." Derek stared at the screeching, red-faced woman standing in front of him. The sheer blinding reality of his catastrophic mistake physically crushed the remaining breath out of his lungs. He had thrown away Isabella. Isabella, the brilliant corporate restructuring manager who had silently carried the agonizing burden of his permanent sterility for 8 long years. Isabella, the loyal wife who had secretly funded his entire lavish existence, paid for his expensive Italian suits, and protected his fragile masculinity from the harsh judgment of the world. He had brutally discarded a self-made billionaire who actually loved him all for a bankrupt, deceitful liar carrying a broke fitness trainer's babies. Derek clutched his chest as a massive, suffocating panic attack violently overtook his body. He stumbled backward, heavily hitting the wooden door frame. He frantically ripped the heavy door open and bolted outside into the cold air. Heavy rain had suddenly begun to pour from the dark, unforgiving sky. Derek ran blindly into the freezing downpour, dropping hard to his knees on the wet asphalt, and let out a long, agonizing, pathetic scream. Derek's agonizing scream faded into the heavy downpour outside. Brittany remained frozen against the ugly floral wallpaper, clutching the cheap silk robe tightly around her shivering body. The small motel room felt entirely devoid of oxygen. Terrence stood near the edge of the lumpy mattress, looking down at the scattered, glossy photographs of his cheating wife and her bankrupt fitness trainer. He did not yell. He did not throw anything. The brilliant orthopedic surgeon simply adjusted his tailored charcoal suit jacket with absolute chilling composure. He had delivered his fatal blow with surgical precision. Terrence looked at Brittany one final time, his dark eyes registering nothing but profound disgust. He placed the thick legal folder containing her divorce papers and the massive financial fraud lawsuit squarely on the rickety nightstand. He turned his back on her, walked out the open door, and quietly closed it behind him. Brittany was completely alone. Panic finally set in. Her chest heaved rapidly as she scrambled across the stained carpet, grabbing her phone with shaking fingers. Derek was gone. Her wealthy husband was gone. Her fraudulent safety net had completely evaporated. She dialed her parents' number, sobbing hysterically the second her mother answered the line. She begged them to come to the motel immediately, claiming she had been horribly victimized and abandoned. 20 minutes later, a leased luxury SUV aggressively swerved into the cracked asphalt parking lot of the rundown motel. Richard and Catherine scrambled out of the vehicle, holding umbrellas against the driving rain. Catherine clutched her designer purse tightly against her chest, looking absolutely horrified by the glowing neon sign and the squalid surroundings. They rushed toward room 214, fully expecting to find their golden child wrongly abused by an arrogant executive. Richard violently pushed the door open, his face red with protective parental rage. He stopped dead in his tracks. Brittany was sitting on the floor, weeping loudly while clutching a crumpled photograph. "Where is Derek?" Richard demanded, his voice echoing in the cramped space. "What on earth are you doing in this disgusting place? Pack your bags right now. We are taking you back to the mansion." Brittany let out a loud, pathetic wail. "There is no mansion!" she shrieked, tears ruining her heavy makeup. "Isabella owns the estate through a secret offshore company. She evicted us this morning. Derek does not have a single dime to his name, his bank accounts are totally frozen, and his car was repossessed." Catherine gasped, pressing a manicured hand to her throat. "What are you talking about? Derek is a wealthy corporate vice president. He promised us a luxurious lifestyle. He promised to take care of us when he married you. He lied," Brittany screamed, pointing a trembling finger at the door. "He lived entirely off Isabella for 8 years. He is completely bankrupt." Richard stared at his sobbing daughter, his mind racing to comprehend the catastrophic financial disaster unfolding before him. He noticed the colorful photographs scattered across the ugly bedspread. He walked over, picked one up, and frowned at the image of Brittany kissing a heavily muscled young man in a cheap athletic shirt. "Who is this?" Richard asked sharply, holding the picture up. Brittany squeezed her eyes shut, unable to look her father in the face. "That is Bradley," she whispered, her voice shaking with shame. "He is a 22-year-old gym trainer. He is the real father of the twins." The absolute silence that followed her confession was deafening. Catherine slowly lowered her hand from her throat. The color completely drained from her face as the horrific reality crashed down upon her. "You staged an affair with your sister's husband using another man's babies," Catherine asked, her voice dropping to a harsh, terrified whisper. "You thought you were trapping a self-made millionaire to fund our family, but you actually trapped a broke middle manager while carrying the children of a bankrupt gym employee." Brittany nodded miserably. "I only did it because Isabella always had everything. I deserved her perfect life." "You absolute fool!" Richard roared, his face turning an ugly shade of purple. He threw the photograph violently onto the floor. "Do you realize what you have done? You did not steal her perfect life. You destroyed our only actual connection to real wealth. Isabella foreclosed on our house today. We are being legally evicted tomorrow morning. We enabled your lazy, spoiled behavior for 30 years because we fully expected you to secure a wealthy husband to fund our luxury retirement. We forced your brilliant sister to sleep on couches and pay for your expensive parties to keep you happy. We alienated a self-made billionaire for you, and you traded all of that away for a broke fitness trainer and a massive mountain of fraudulent credit card debt." Catherine began to hyperventilate. The terrifying prospect of impending homelessness completely shattered her arrogant facade. Her golden child was a total failure. The mansion was gone. Their country club status was permanently eradicated. In a state of absolute blind desperation, Catherine pulled her smartphone from her designer purse. Her hands shook violently as she searched her contacts for her eldest daughter's number. She pressed the call button and lifted the phone to her ear, listening to the agonizing rings. She needed to beg. She needed to grovel on her hands and knees if necessary to save herself from the gutter. The line clicked open. "Isabella?" Catherine sobbed hysterically, tears streaming down her face. Please, you have to listen to me. I am so incredibly sorry. We made a terrible mistake. Please forgive us. We need your help today." A cold, flat, entirely unrecognizable voice answered on the other end of the line. "Who is this?" I asked calmly, my voice showing absolutely zero emotion. "I do not have parents anymore." The polished mahogany table stretched across the mediation room. I sat in a high-backed chair wearing a custom ivory suit that projected absolute authority. My posture was perfectly straight. My hands rested calmly on the smooth surface. I had spent the last 8 years managing hostile corporate takeovers. Today, I was applying those ruthless principles to dismantle my marriage. The heavy door clicked open. Derek stumbled inside, followed by his flustered legal counsel. The physical transformation of my husband was truly staggering. The arrogant man who had proudly paraded his pregnant mistress at the country club was completely gone. Derek looked essentially homeless. His immaculate hair was greasy and unkempt. He wore a cheap gray suit hanging loosely on his frame. His eyes were bloodshot and heavily bagged from severe sleep deprivation. The massive corporate consequences I unleashed upon him had ravaged his existence. Derek collapsed into the chair opposite mine. He could barely lift his head to meet my gaze. His lawyer, a nervous man named Gibson, frantically organized a thin stack of messy papers. My legal counsel, attorney Maxwell, sat beside me, looking like a seasoned predator watching a wounded animal. "Isabella," Derek whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "Please look at me. I have absolutely nothing left. I sleep in a miserable budget motel room because my mother kicked me out. I lost the luxury car. I am blacklisted from the entire logistics industry. I am begging you to show me a tiny fraction of mercy. We spent 8 years of our lives together. We shared a home and built a life. I am so incredibly sorry for everything I did to you. I was a complete fool to ever look at Brittany. I realize now that you were the best thing that ever happened to me." I stared at him with absolute zero emotion. He was deliberately using the long history of our marriage to manufacture cheap sympathy. He thought shedding a few pathetic tears would instantly erase the public humiliation he had subjected me to. He was hoping I would revert back to the compliant, generous wife who silently absorbed his inadequacies. He had no idea that woman was permanently dead. "My client is currently experiencing severe emotional distress," Gibson interjected, attempting to sound authoritative but failing miserably. The sudden and violent termination of his employment, combined with the immediate freezing of his primary financial accounts, has left him entirely destitute. We are formally requesting temporary spousal support to help him transition into his new reality. Given the massive scale of your personal wealth, a monthly stipend of $20,000 is highly reasonable. He also requires a lump sum settlement to secure appropriate housing. I slowly turned my head to look at the cheap lawyer. The sheer audacity of their request was almost entertaining. Derek had publicly declared his absolute hatred for me. He had proudly claimed he fathered twins with my own sister. He had aggressively demanded the keys to my $3 million mansion. Now he was sitting across from me begging for a monthly allowance like a disobedient child. "You want me to pay spousal support?" I asked quietly, ensuring my voice remained perfectly level and calm. "You want me to finance a comfortable lifestyle for a man who spent the last 6 months sleeping with my younger sister?" Derek buried his face in his hands and let out a loud, pathetic sob. "I made a catastrophic mistake," he cried out. "But the law says marital assets must be divided fairly. You have millions of dollars hidden in offshore accounts. You own the entire parent company of the business that just fired me. You are a billionaire, Isabella. Giving me a small settlement will not even put a tiny dent in your massive wealth. If you just give me enough cash to start over, I promise I will sign the divorce papers and quietly disappear from your life forever." Attorney Maxwell smoothly opened his thick leather briefcase. He pulled out a massive stack of heavily tabbed financial documents and placed them squarely on the center of the mahogany table. He slid the towering pile directly toward Derek and his sweating legal counsel. "My client is not giving you a single penny," Attorney Maxwell stated, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "In fact, we are not here to negotiate any form of spousal support or financial settlement. We are here to officially present you with a devastating countersuit." Derek snapped his head up. His red eyes widened in sheer panic as he stared at the towering stack of documents resting in front of him. Gibson frantically grabbed the top page and began rapidly scanning the dense legal text. The color completely drained from the cheap lawyer's face as he realized the sheer magnitude of the trap they had just blindly walked into. During your employment at Vanguard Global Logistics, you had access to a premium corporate credit card, Attorney Maxwell explained coldly. You used that specific corporate account to aggressively finance luxury hotel suites, expensive dinners, and romantic weekend getaways with your mistress. You actively embezzled an astronomical amount of money from your employer to maintain the illusion of immense wealth. Derek began to shake violently in his chair. As you recently discovered, my client is the primary stakeholder and acting chief executive officer of the parent conglomerate that fully owns that logistics firm, Attorney Maxwell continued relentlessly. Therefore, the massive amount of money you illegally stole belonged directly to her corporate entities. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table and locked my eyes directly onto my terrified husband. You do not get to walk away with a settlement, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, commanding whisper. You committed severe corporate fraud. My legal team calculated the exact monetary value of every single dollar you embezzled to spend on my sister. You are going to repay all of it with massive interest. You owe me money, Derek. The crushing reality of that massive financial debt left Derek hyperventilating in the mediation room. I did not stay to watch him suffocate. I walked out of the legal suite with my head held high, leaving my cheating husband entirely in the hands of my ruthless legal team. 3 days later, I was enjoying a rare moment of quiet victory. I sat at a secluded corner table inside Le Méridien, one of the most exclusive and heavily guarded culinary establishments in the city. The ambient lighting caught the sparkle of the crystal glassware, and the soft jazz playing in the background perfectly matched my triumphant mood. I was reviewing the final acquisition documents for my latest corporate merger, savoring a pristine glass of imported sparkling water. Then the heavy velvet curtains near the entrance were violently shoved aside. Patricia Derek's deeply status-obsessed mother frantically pushed her way past the highly offended restaurant host. She looked absolutely nothing like the arrogant pearl-wearing matriarch who had constantly sneered at my career ambitions during 8 years of miserable family dinners. Her expensive cashmere sweater was stained and heavily wrinkled. Her usually immaculate hair stuck out in wild, unkempt angles. Her eyes darted around the elegant dining room like a cornered animal desperately searching for an escape route. She spotted me sitting in the private corner booth and immediately sprinted across the dining room floor. Isabella Patricia cried out loudly, her shrill voice completely shattering the refined atmosphere of the luxury restaurant. Please, you have to talk to me. You have to listen to me right now. I did not flinch. I slowly set my pen down on top of my corporate documents and looked at the frantic woman rushing toward my table. 2 massive security guards belonging to my personal detail instantly stepped forward from the shadows, physically blocking Patricia from getting anywhere near my personal space. Let her speak, I commanded quietly, raising a single hand to halt my highly trained security team. I want to hear exactly what she has to say for herself. Patricia practically collapsed against the edge of my table, tears violently streaming down her aging face. She reached out desperately, trying to grab my hand, but I pulled my arm back, resting it firmly against the expensive leather booth. You have to take Derek back, Patricia begged, her chest heaving with heavy, ragged sobs. He is completely destroyed, Isabella. He made a catastrophic, unforgivable mistake. But it was not his fault. It was that evil, manipulative sister of yours. Brittany cast some kind of wicked spell over him. She fed his ego, she lied to him about the babies, and she completely brainwashed my innocent son into throwing away his perfect marriage. Derek still loves you. He cries for you every single night. You have to find it in your heart to forgive him. I stared at her, genuinely amazed by her absolute delusion. She was standing in a room full of wealthy elites, publicly begging me to rescue the son who had just proudly humiliated me on a stage. Brittany did not hold a gun to his head, Patricia, I replied, my voice completely cold and devoid of any sympathy. Derek willingly jumped into her bed. He happily charged romantic hotel suites to a corporate credit card. He aggressively demanded the keys to my $3 million estate. Your son is a grown man who made his own disgustingly arrogant choices. He chose to destroy our vows. Patricia shook her head wildly, fresh tears ruining her expensive makeup. You do not understand what is happening to us, she wailed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. I am being evicted from my house tomorrow morning. I raised an eyebrow, silently urging her to continue her pathetic confession. Derek has been paying the lease on my luxury townhome for the past 5 years. Patricia admitted, her shoulders slumping forward in absolute defeat. I have absolutely no retirement savings left. My late husband left me drowning in massive secret debt. Derek promised he would always take care of me using his powerful executive salary. But now his bank accounts are completely frozen, he has no job and zero income. My landlord handed me a formal eviction notice yesterday afternoon. We are completely out of money. If you do not stop this legal slaughter and take him back, we will both be sleeping on the streets. The truth was finally exposed to the bright daylight. Patricia did not care about the sanctity of our marriage. She did not care about Derek's broken heart or my profound emotional pain. She only cared about her own financial survival. For 8 years, she had constantly criticized my corporate ambition, calling me cold and unwomanly, while secretly living off the massive wealth that my ambition provided. I looked at the weeping woman standing before me, feeling absolutely nothing but pure, unadulterated disgust. You hated me from the day Derek brought me home, I stated clearly, making sure every word landed like a physical blow. You constantly told him I was too focused on my career. You babied him his entire life, inflating his fragile ego until he actually believed he was a powerful titan of industry. And when he decided to publicly humiliate me and proudly claim another man's children as his own, you fully supported his grand illusion. You cheered for my public downfall. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table, and locked my eyes directly onto hers. I kept his sterile secret to protect his pride, I whispered, my voice sharp and unforgiving. He repaid me with public humiliation. Tell your son to enjoy the gutter. I raised my hand and signaled my security team. The 2 massive guards immediately stepped forward, grabbing Patricia by both of her trembling arms. She screamed and thrashed wildly as they dragged her backward through the elegant restaurant, hauling her out the heavy double doors and throwing her directly onto the cold concrete sidewalk. That simple gesture severed the final decaying thread connecting me to the people who birthed me. I felt no sorrow. I felt an immense clarifying wave of absolute peace wash over my corner office. I turned my attention back to the corporate merger documents resting on my desk, entirely indifferent to the catastrophic implosion happening across town. At the Oak Ridge estate, the atmosphere was rapidly deteriorating into absolute madness. Brittany had spent her last remaining dollars on a rideshare service to transport her from the squalid motel back to the sprawling suburban mansion. She dragged her heavy designer suitcase up the pristine brick walkway, her expensive maternity dress wrinkled and damp from the afternoon rain. She was fully expecting to be coddled. She expected her mother to wrap her in a warm embrace, brew her a cup of herbal tea, and immediately start plotting a new scheme to secure financial stability. She believed she was still the untouchable golden child of the family. Brittany pushed open the heavy mahogany front door and stepped into the grand foyer. The scene she encountered was completely chaotic. Richard and Catherine were not preparing afternoon tea. They were frantically rushing around the living room, aggressively tearing valuable oil paintings off the walls and hastily wrapping them in thick bubble wrap. Antique silver dining sets were piled haphazardly onto the expensive Persian rug. They looked like terrified looters raiding their own home. Mom, Brittany cried out, dropping her heavy suitcase onto the polished hardwood floor. You have to help me right now. Derek is completely broke and permanently sterile. He ran out of the motel like a total maniac. My fitness trainer told me to stop calling him because he has a new girlfriend. Terrence just served me with a massive financial fraud lawsuit. I need to move back into my old bedroom today. You need to hire me a ruthless divorce attorney immediately. Catherine stopped wrapping a silver candlestick. She slowly turned to look at her youngest daughter. The maternal warmth that usually softened Catherine's features whenever she looked at Brittany was completely gone. Her eyes were cold hard and filled with venomous resentment. Richard stepped forward, his face turning an alarming shade of dark purple. He aggressively kicked a cardboard moving box out of his way. "Hire you an attorney!" Richard bellowed, his voice echoing violently off the high ceilings. "With what money, you absolute imbecile?" "Isabella just foreclosed on this entire property. We are being legally evicted from our home because of your spectacular stupidity. You ruined our only source of actual wealth." Brittany recoiled, completely shocked by her father's aggressive tone. "But I am your favorite," she stammered, placing a protective hand over her pregnant stomach. "I am carrying your twin grandchildren. You have to take care of me." Catherine let out a harsh, bitter laugh that sounded almost manic. She marched up the grand sweeping staircase and disappeared into the second-floor hallway. "Take care of you," Richard sneered, stepping closer to his terrified daughter. "We catered to your every single whim for 30 years. We forced your brilliant, wealthy sister to fund your lavish lifestyle because we firmly believed you were going to marry a high-society millionaire. You were supposed to be our ultimate retirement plan, Brittany. Instead, you blew up a perfectly good marriage to an elite orthopedic surgeon. You trapped yourself with a bankrupt gym employee. Then you tried to scam a sterile middle manager who did not even have his own bank account. You are not a beauty queen anymore. You are a massive, worthless liability." Catherine reappeared at the top of the grand staircase. She was aggressively dragging 3 heavy black garbage bags behind her. The plastic tore against the wooden steps, spilling expensive designer shoes and silk blouses onto the stairs. "I packed up the rest of your closet," Catherine shouted, hauling the heavy bags down the remaining steps. "You do not get to live here anymore. We have exactly 24 hours to salvage whatever valuables we can physically carry before Isabella's private security team locks us out of this estate forever. We do not have the time, the space, or the money to deal with your monumental failures." "Mom, please!" Brittany shrieked, tears streaming down her heavily contoured face. "You cannot do this to me. I have nowhere else to go." "Terrence changed the locks on our apartment. My credit cards are entirely frozen." Catherine grabbed the collar of Brittany's designer maternity dress and physically shoved her toward the open front door. "Then you better start walking to a homeless shelter." Catherine spat, her voice dripping with sheer cruelty. "You cost us our luxury lifestyle. You cost us our country club memberships. You ruined our perfect image. Get out of my sight before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing." Richard grabbed the heavy black garbage bags and forcefully threw them out the front door. They landed on the wet, manicured lawn with a dull thud. Designer shoes and expensive handbags scattered across the damp green grass. He shoved Brittany's rolling suitcase out right behind them. The toxic family was finally eating itself alive. The conditional love they had always shared evaporated the exact second the financial benefits vanished. Brittany stumbled backward onto the front porch, openly sobbing as her parents violently slammed the heavy mahogany door directly in her face. The loud click of the deadbolt locking into place echoed across the quiet suburban neighborhood. The golden child was officially exiled to the gutter. As Brittany sank to her knees on the wet concrete, frantically gathering her ruined designer clothing, a white patrol cruiser slowly pulled into the long, circular driveway. A uniformed county sheriff stepped out of the vehicle holding a thick clipboard. He completely ignored the weeping pregnant woman kneeling on the ground. He walked straight past Brittany, his heavy boots splashing through the shallow puddles on the brick walkway. He marched up the front steps, pulled a heavy metal staple gun from his utility belt, and drove 2 sharp staples directly into the pristine wood of the grand front door. The official legally binding eviction notice fluttered in the afternoon breeze. Isabella's foreclosure process was officially completed. While the heavy metal staples secured the eviction notice to my former parents' front door, a completely different type of hammer was falling inside the county courthouse. Terrence sat at the plaintiff table in family court wearing a perfectly tailored navy blue suit. His posture was impeccable, projecting an aura of absolute unshakable calm. Across the aisle sat Brittany. She looked completely unrecognizable from the glamorous woman she had pretended to be just a few short weeks ago. Her hair was pulled into a messy knot, and she was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting maternity dress. She lacked legal representation because she simply could not afford to hire an attorney. Terrence had spent the entirety of their marriage absorbing her constant complaints, her superficial demands, and her blatant disrespect. Brittany had always mistaken his quiet, measured demeanor for weakness. She assumed his long hours at the hospital meant he was oblivious to her actions. She thought he was a passive man she could easily manipulate and discard. She was spectacularly wrong. Terrence was a highly trained orthopedic surgeon. He spent his days meticulously reconstructing shattered bones with absolute calculated precision. He applied that exact same surgical patience to dismantling his toxic marriage. The presiding judge reviewed the massive stack of financial documents Terrence had submitted. The evidence was completely undeniable. Brittany had actively forged his signature on 3 separate high-limit credit card applications. She had illegally bypassed the security protocols by using a fake email address and a secret post office box to intercept the monthly statements. She had intentionally committed severe financial fraud to fund her deceptive affair with Derek. Brittany stood up in the courtroom, clutching the edge of the wooden table with shaking hands. She attempted to play the victim one final time. She produced fake tears and sobbed loudly, begging the judge for mercy. She claimed she was a vulnerable, abandoned pregnant woman who desperately needed financial support to survive. She insisted that Terrence, as a wealthy surgeon, should be forced to cover the credit card balances because they were accumulated during the course of their legal marriage. She whined that expecting her to pay would leave her completely destitute. Terrence did not interrupt her pathetic theatrical performance. He simply waited for her to finish speaking, maintaining his stoic, professional expression. When the judge finally turned to him for a response, Terrence calmly presented the police report he had filed for identity theft, alongside the detailed digital footprints proving Brittany acted with malicious, premeditated intent. The judge slammed his wooden gavel down with a sharp, echoing crack. The ruling was absolute and completely merciless. The court determined the $150,000 debt was accumulated through deliberate criminal fraud. The judge legally assigned every single penny of that massive financial burden entirely to Brittany. Furthermore, because she was carrying children that a paternity test proved did not belong to Terrence, he was officially absolved of any and all child support obligations. The divorce was granted immediately. Brittany collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her hands as she wailed in pure agony. Her grand illusion was totally shattered. She had no husband, no wealthy lover, no wealthy sister to leech off of, and no supportive parents to rescue her. She was facing a mountain of fraudulent debt and a pregnancy she could not afford. Terrence stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked out of the courtroom without giving his ex-wife a single backward glance. He had reclaimed his absolute dignity. 2 hours later, I was sitting at a private corner table inside a highly exclusive rooftop restaurant overlooking the vibrant city skyline. The restaurant host escorted Terrence directly to my table. We both looked completely different than the last time we met at that dingy downtown cafe. The heavy, suffocating weight of our toxic spouses had been permanently lifted from our shoulders. Terrence slid into the luxurious leather booth across from me and offered a genuine, relaxed smile. I raised my crystal glass of imported sparkling water. He raised his glass to match mine. The glass clinked softly in the quiet, sophisticated dining room. We toasted to our mutual freedom, to the swift delivery of absolute justice, and to the complete financial destruction of the parasites who had tried to ruin us. The dead weight has been successfully liquidated, I said, enjoying the crisp taste of my expensive drink. Surgically removed and permanently discarded. Terrence agreed, leaning back in his chair. We ordered a lavish lunch to celebrate our legal victories. We did not waste another breath discussing Derek, Brittany, or my deceitful parents. They were permanently relegated to the garbage bin of our past. Instead, we discussed the future. We talked about global markets, emerging medical technologies, and the thrill of building massive wealth on our own terms. We recognized that surviving the extreme toxicity of our past relationships had uniquely prepared us for the cutthroat environment of the competitive business world. As the waiter cleared our empty plates away, Terrence reached into his leather briefcase. The air between us crackled with a sudden new energy. He pulled out a crisp, heavy black folder and slid it smoothly across the white tablecloth. It was not a file filled with fraudulent bank statements or scandalous ultrasound photographs. It was something entirely different. I opened the thick folder and scanned the executive summary printed on the very first page. It was a highly detailed, extremely comprehensive business plan. I have spent the last 3 years developing a revolutionary robotic surgical tool. Terrence said, his dark eyes shining with intense, brilliant ambition. I have the medical expertise and the patented designs, but I need a ruthless corporate executive to handle the complex financial restructuring and aggressive global market launch. I want you as my equal managing partner in this medical tech startup. Are you absolutely ready to build a massive empire together starting right here today? Derek sat in a rigid plastic chair, nervously bouncing his knee inside the employment agency. He was wearing the only suit he had left, a charcoal two-piece. The collar of his shirt was frayed, and his expensive leather shoes were scuffed from miles of walking. He was miles away from the mahogany desk and panoramic city views he once commanded. Today, he was applying for a position as a basic shift supervisor at a regional shipping warehouse. It was a massive demotion, but he was entirely desperate. Patricia had kicked him out of her cramped apartment, blaming him entirely for her sudden poverty. Brittany was facing massive legal debt, and Terrence had destroyed her life. Derek had absolutely zero income and zero assets. The door to the inner office swung open. A heavy-set manager stepped out holding a thin manila folder. He did not look impressed. Derek, the manager, said, his voice flat. "Come back inside." Derek stood up quickly, forcing an arrogant smile onto his face. He smoothed his wrinkled jacket, trying to project the aura of a highly successful logistics vice president. He walked into the cramped office and took a seat across from the battered metal desk. "I am confident my extensive background in supply chain operations will be a massive asset to your warehouse," Derek began. "I previously managed international shipping routes and handled executive-level logistics for Vanguard Global. I can easily optimize your floor operations and increase daily throughput by 20%. The stern warehouse manager did not smile. He simply opened the manila folder and stared at the single sheet of paper inside. "Your resume certainly looks impressive on the surface," the manager stated coldly. "But we run a background check on all potential management hires. We need to ensure the people handling our inventory are trustworthy." Derek felt a knot form in his stomach. He swallowed hard, trying to maintain his confident facade. "Of course," Derek replied, his voice wavering slightly. "I have a perfectly clean record. I am a highly respected professional in this global shipping industry." The manager slowly turned the piece of paper around and slid it across the desk. Derek looked down. The bold red letters seemed to burn directly into his retinas. The report was damning. "This background check tells a very different story," the manager said, crossing his thick arms. "It clearly flags a recent termination from Vanguard Global Logistics. The official reason listed for your sudden dismissal is gross misconduct and corporate embezzlement. It states you illegally charged thousands of dollars in personal expenses to a corporate credit card." Derek felt all the blood drain from his face. His carefully constructed illusion of professionalism shattered instantly. Isabella had not just fired him. Her corporate auditors had attached the embezzlement charges to his official employment record. She had ensured that his toxic behavior would follow him forever. "That is a complete misunderstanding," Derek stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "It was a simple clerical error regarding a few expense reports. My vindictive ex-wife orchestrated the entire thing to ruin my career. I am a completely innocent victim in this situation." "We do not hire thieves," the manager interrupted harshly, snatching the paper back. "I do not care about your marital drama. You stole corporate funds. You are blacklisted in the logistics industry. No company will ever hand you the keys to their inventory. You are a massive liability." "Do you have any idea who I am?" Derek shouted, his fragile ego rejecting the rejection. "I was a powerful vice president. I managed millions of dollars in freight. You cannot speak to me this way. I am vastly superior to this miserable warehouse job anyway." The manager stood up, pointing a thick finger at the door. "Get out of my office right now," he commanded. before I call building security and have you thrown onto the street. Derek stumbled backward, the humiliation knocking the wind out of his lungs. He was experiencing the exact helplessness he used to inflict on lower-level employees. He remembered the junior analyst he had mercilessly bullied just weeks ago. He had treated subordinates like garbage, acting like an untouchable king. Now he was the one being discarded. He turned and ran out of the office. He pushed past the waiting applicants and burst through the heavy glass doors into the sunlight. He stumbled down the steps and collapsed onto a wooden bench. His chest heaved with panicked breaths. He was completely trapped. He had no money, no home, no family support, and no hope of finding employment in his chosen field. Isabella had executed a flawless corporate execution. She had dismantled every pillar of his arrogant existence, leaving him with nothing but the crushing weight of his own monumental failures. Derek buried his face in his hands, overwhelmed by the bleak reality of his destroyed life. He sat on the bench for hours watching shadows lengthen as the sun slowly set behind the towering city skyline. He was hungry, exhausted, and defeated. Eventually, streetlights flickered to life, casting a harsh glare over the busy intersection. Derek lifted his head, his eyes scanning the chaotic urban environment. Suddenly, a massive burst of bright light caught his attention. He squinted, staring at a giant digital billboard mounted on the side of a prominent luxury hotel across the crowded street. The display shifted, revealing a larger-than-life photograph. Derek stopped breathing. His heart pounded violently. Staring down at him from the massive electronic screen was Isabella. She looked incredibly powerful, wearing a tailored suit radiating absolute authority. The glowing text beneath her beautiful face announced an upcoming highly exclusive event. Isabella was officially listed as the keynote speaker for the annual Fortune 500 Gala, scheduled tomorrow night. Derek stared at the billboard, a desperate, pathetic plan rapidly forming in his shattered mind. He had nothing left to lose. He would find a way to crash the gala and confront her. He forms a desperate, pathetic plan to crash it. Meanwhile, across the sprawling city, a profoundly different kind of agonizing desperation was violently unfolding inside the cramped, incredibly noisy confines of a heavily underfunded public hospital. The sterile, flickering fluorescent lights buzzed aggressively overhead, casting a sickly pale yellow glow across the peeling linoleum floors. This was absolutely not the highly exclusive, incredibly luxurious private maternity suite that Brittany had arrogantly demanded Terrence reserve for her 6 months ago. She was not currently surrounded by expensive imported flowers, attentive private nurses, or a dedicated team of elite medical specialists. Instead, she was lying on a thin, uncomfortable mattress in a shared, chaotic recovery ward, listening to the relentless beeping of outdated medical monitors and loud, echoing cries of other newborns, feeling completely trapped within this incredibly grim and terrifying nightmare of her own absolute making. Brittany shifted her exhausted, aching body on the stiff hospital bed, wincing sharply as a fresh wave of severe physical pain radiated through her entirely depleted system. She had just given birth to 2 healthy twin boys after 14 grueling, agonizing hours of intense labor. The massive physical toll was completely undeniable, but the overwhelming emotional isolation was vastly more punishing. She slowly turned her head, desperately scanning the busy, crowded hospital room for a single familiar face. She expected to see a loving family member rushing to her bedside with tears of absolute joy. She expected her mother to aggressively direct the hospital staff. She expected someone, anyone, to acknowledge her monumentally difficult achievement. The harsh, unyielding reality was utterly devastating. There was absolutely nobody there to hold her hand. The cold plastic visitor chair, positioned directly next to her narrow hospital bed, remained entirely empty. Her parents, Richard and Catherine, had brutally ignored every single one of her frantic, desperate phone calls. They were far too busy frantically packing their remaining stolen belongings and fighting their impending, highly humiliating legal eviction from the Oak Ridge estate to care about the birth of their grandsons. They had completely written off their former golden child the exact moment she lost fraudulent access to Isabella's immense invisible wealth. Brittany reached out with a trembling, heavily sweating hand and grabbed her cracked smartphone from the scratched plastic tray table. She forcefully bit her cracked lower lip, fighting back a massive, humiliating wave of hot tears. She hastily pulled up her recent text messages, desperately hoping for a miraculous reprieve from her total isolation. She navigated directly to the contact name she had secretly saved as a fake nail salon during her marriage. It was Bradley, the 22-year-old bankrupt fitness trainer who was the actual biological father of the two infants currently sleeping in the hospital nursery. She had sent him 12 lengthy, increasingly hysterical text messages over the past 48 hours, begging him to come to the public hospital, pleading with him to finally take absolute responsibility for his own children. She watched the screen intently, her heart pounding a frantic, chaotic rhythm against her aching ribs. Suddenly, a small gray text bubble finally appeared on the cracked screen. Bradley was actively typing a response. Brittany let out a sharp, desperate gasp of pure relief, eagerly anticipating a message of love, support, or even basic human decency. The message abruptly appeared. It was ruthlessly short, devastatingly cruel, and completely final. "Stop calling this number right now, Brittany," the harsh text message, read entirely devoid of any warmth or compassion. "I already told you last week that we are completely finished. I am functionally bankrupt, and I literally cannot even afford to pay my own cheap rent this month. I definitely cannot afford to raise two screaming babies. Furthermore, I have a new girlfriend now, and she is extremely uncomfortable with you constantly blowing up my phone every single hour. Do not ever contact me again, or I will legally block your number and file a formal harassment complaint." Brittany dropped the cracked phone onto the thin, scratchy hospital blanket as if it had suddenly caught fire. A choked, pathetic sob forcefully tore its way out of her dry throat. The brutal, inescapable truth violently crashed down upon her, completely shattering the remaining fragile pieces of her heavily manufactured delusions. She was entirely, profoundly alone. Derek, the arrogant corporate vice president she thought she had successfully stolen, was a bankrupt, sterile fraud who had run screaming into the rain. Terrence, the brilliant, wealthy orthopedic surgeon she had foolishly betrayed, had legally finalized their divorce and permanently saddled her with $150,000 of massive credit card debt. Bradley, her young athletic lover, had completely abandoned her for another woman. She had greedily tried to manipulate the entire world to secure a life of unimaginable luxury, and she had ultimately ended up with absolutely nothing but staggering debt and total isolation. A tired, overworked hospital orderly, wearing a faded blue uniform, suddenly pushed past the heavy privacy curtains surrounding her small bed area. He did not offer a warm smile or a cheerful congratulation. He simply held a large, thick manila envelope bearing a highly official, intimidating red wax seal. "Are you Brittany the orderly?" asked his voice, entirely flat and monotone. "A specialized legal courier just dropped this off at the main front reception desk. They specifically said it required immediate direct delivery to you." Brittany slowly reached out and took the heavy envelope with shaking fingers. She carefully broke the red wax seal and pulled out a stack of crisp, perfectly printed legal documents. The prominent embossed letterhead belonged to Isabella's elite, highly aggressive corporate crisis management law firm. Brittany's eyes darted frantically across the complex legal text, her breathing growing incredibly shallow and rapid. It was an official, legally binding invoice. It was a comprehensive, ruthlessly detailed bill, demanding immediate financial restitution for the exact monetary value of the lavish $50,000 luxury baby shower she had completely ruined. While Brittany stared at the devastating invoice, a vastly different nightmare unfolded across the city. Richard and Catherine were standing in the center of a cramped, dimly lit, incredibly dingy one-bedroom apartment in a notoriously dangerous neighborhood. The air inside smelled sharply of stale cigarettes, cheap bleach, and rotting garbage. The faded linoleum floor was peeling, and a brown water stain spread across the sagging ceiling. This was the only miserable shelter they could secure with the pocket change they scraped together after the bank froze their accounts. Now they stared blankly at a stained, lumpy futon. Catherine dropped a heavy black garbage bag onto the sticky floor. It contained the few items of clothing she managed to stuff inside before Isabella's security physically escorted them off the estate. She looked around the squalid room, her face contorting in pure disgust. The oppressive heat caused her expensive hair to frizz wildly. Richard stood near the rusted kitchenette, gripping the edge of the chipped counter so tightly his knuckles turned white. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving with physical exhaustion and blinding rage. The illusion of their upper-class status had violently shattered, leaving them standing in the pathetic rubble of their greedy decisions. "This is entirely your fault!" Catherine shrieked, her shrill voice echoing sharply against the poorly insulated walls. "You were supposed to be managing our financial portfolios. You were supposed to be investing in secure retirement funds. Instead, you spent the last 15 years secretly leeching off Isabella's corporate dividends while pretending you were a brilliant financial genius. You leased luxury cars we could not afford. You completely ruined us." Richard whipped around his face, turning an alarming shade of dark, furious crimson. "Do not you dare stand there and blame me for this absolute catastrophe," he roared, taking a threatening step toward his wife. "You constantly coddled Brittany. You treated that manipulative girl like a flawless princess, while treating our eldest daughter like an automated teller machine. You openly encouraged Brittany to steal Derek because you thought he controlled the wealth. You alienated the only person in this family who actually possessed real power. You dug this miserable grave, Catherine." They stood in the foul-smelling room, viciously tearing each other apart. The refined manners they carefully projected to high society for 30 years were entirely gone, replaced by venomous insults and desperate accusations. They blamed each other for their total financial destruction, unable to accept their own responsibility. They had spent their entire lives united by shared greed and mutual disdain for Isabella's ambition. Now that the money had evaporated, the toxic glue holding their marriage together violently dissolved. They were two broke parasites turning on each other to survive. Catherine sank onto the stained futon, sobbing hysterically. "We need money immediately," Richard muttered aggressively, pacing across the peeling linoleum floor. "We have absolutely nothing left in the bank. The emergency credit cards have been completely deactivated. We cannot even afford to buy groceries, let alone pay the exorbitant legal fees required to fight the foreclosure. We have to secure steady income right now, or we will be sleeping on the concrete sidewalk by next month. I am 62 years old. Nobody in the corporate sector is going to hire a bankrupt man with no modern technological skills. We have been blacklisted by every single former wealthy friend." Catherine slowly lifted her head, her tear-streaked makeup making her look incredibly haggard and desperate. "What if we call Vanguard Horizon Financial?" she suggested, her voice shaking with a pathetic creeping sense of hope. "Isabella essentially owns the entire parent conglomerate now. She controls thousands of jobs across the city. We are still her parents. She might be furious with us, but she cannot legally let us starve in the street. If we swallow our pride and beg human resources for a position, they might place us somewhere. I could be a receptionist. You could work in the mailroom. We just need a simple paycheck." Richard stopped pacing. He hated the idea of begging the daughter he constantly belittled, but the sharp pang of hunger in his stomach and the putrid smell of the apartment left him with zero alternatives. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket. He quickly navigated to the corporate directory for Vanguard Horizon Financial. He dialed the primary number for the Central Human Resources Department, putting the phone on speaker. The line rang 3 times before a crisp, highly professional female voice answered the call. "Thank you for calling Vanguard Horizon Financial Human Resources," the representative stated clearly. "How may I direct your inquiry today?" "Yes. Hello there," Richard said, forcing his voice to sound authoritative despite his desperate situation. "My name is Richard, her father. I am calling to inquire about immediate employment opportunities within the administrative sector. I am actually the biological father of your new chief executive officer, Isabella. I would like to speak directly with a senior hiring manager about securing a position for myself and my wife, Catherine. We are extremely hardworking people, and we are willing to accept entry-level roles and can begin working immediately." There was a long, excruciatingly uncomfortable pause on the other end of the line. The loud clicking sound of rapid keyboard typing echoed loudly through the cheap speakerphone. "I apologize, sir," the human resources representative finally replied, her tone dropping into a completely flat, icy register that sent a terrifying chill straight down Richard's spine. "I have just pulled up the Central Security Directory for all Vanguard Horizon corporate properties and subsidiaries. Isabella has personally issued a strict company-wide do not admit list, explicitly featuring high-resolution photographs of your faces. You and Catherine are legally banned from entering any building owned by this conglomerate. If you attempt to access any corporate facility, armed security will immediately detain you for trespassing, and local law enforcement will be contacted to remove you. You are entirely excommunicated now." The human resources representative disconnected the call, leaving my parents to listen to the cold dial tone. They were entirely excommunicated now, permanently erased from the corporate empire they had desperately tried to infiltrate. I did not waste a single second thinking about their profound misery. I had an incredibly important evening ahead of me. Tonight was the highly anticipated annual Fortune 500 Gala, the absolute most prestigious corporate event of the entire year. It was my official debut as the ultimate victor. The untouchable chief executive officer who successfully conquered her industry and completely destroyed her toxic, cheating husband. I stood in front of the massive mirror inside my luxury penthouse, admiring my reflection. I was wearing a custom Christian Dior gown that hugged my curves perfectly. The dark emerald silk cascaded down to the floor, shimmering with every movement. A delicate diamond necklace rested against my collarbone, catching the bright ambient light. I looked like an absolute queen, radiating sheer power and absolute confidence. The fragile, accommodating wife who silently absorbed Derek and all his endless insults was gone forever. She had been completely replaced by a ruthless corporate titan who commanded absolute respect and demanded total submission. My doorbell chimed softly, signaling the arrival of my new business partner. I grabbed my expensive clutch and walked toward the entrance. Terrence stood in the marble hallway looking incredibly sharp in a tailored black tuxedo. He exuded quiet authority and refined elegance, a stark contrast to the loud, obnoxious behavior Derek always displayed at formal events. Terrence offered his arm with a respectful smile, and we descended to the waiting limousine. We were no longer two betrayed spouses drowning in misery. We were a united front ready to conquer the elite medical technology market and dominate the corporate world. The luxury vehicle glided smoothly through the bustling city streets before finally arriving at the Grand Plaza. Massive spotlights illuminated the night sky, and photographers swarmed the long red carpet. When the driver opened my door, a barrage of flashing cameras immediately captured our grand entrance. Terrence guided me effortlessly through the chaotic crowd. We stepped into the magnificent ballroom, which was decorated with lavish floral arrangements and dripping with immense wealth. The room was filled with the highest tier of society, the very same elite individuals who had witnessed Derek humiliate me at that country club baby shower event. As we made our way across the polished floor, a sudden hush fell over the surrounding tables. The wealthy socialites who had previously whispered cruel gossip behind my back were now staring at me in absolute awe. They recognized the sheer dominance radiating from my posture, word of my aggressive corporate takeover, and the complete financial annihilation of my cheating husband had already spread through their exclusive circles with incredible speed. Instead of casting pitying glances, they eagerly flocked toward me. They offered enthusiastic congratulations, desperate to align themselves with the woman who now controlled a massive international logistics conglomerate. Terrence remained faithfully by my side, introducing me to key medical investors and highly influential hospital administrators. We seamlessly pitched our new robotic surgical technology, securing millions in potential venture capital within the first hour alone. I commanded the room with effortless grace, easily dismantling any lingering doubts about my capability. Every powerful executive who approached us was thoroughly captivated by our brilliant synergy. I felt an incredible surge of vindication. This was exactly where I belonged. I had successfully transformed my personal nightmare into an absolute masterpiece of professional triumph, rising far above the pathetic ashes of my past. The gala organizers announced that dinner was being served, directing guests toward the exquisite dining tables. Terrence and I were seated at the most prominent center table, surrounded by billionaires and industry leaders. As I raised my crystal glass to propose a toast to our new partnership, a sudden commotion erupted near the front entrance. The heavy mahogany doors were violently pushed open, causing the security guards to scramble frantically. The sophisticated music abruptly stopped, and a collective gasp rippled through the elegant crowd. I slowly lowered my glass, my sharp eyes locking onto the source of the terrible disruption. Standing in the grand doorway looking like a feral animal trapped in a spotlight was Derek. He had somehow managed to slip past the outer perimeter caterers, bypassing all the strict security checkpoints. He was wearing a remarkably cheap, terribly wrinkled gray suit that hung loosely on his emaciated frame. His hair was greasy and matted to his forehead, while thick, dark bags hung heavily under his wild, bloodshot eyes. He looked absolutely nothing like the arrogant, polished logistics executive he had once pretended to be. He was completely unhinged, radiating an aura of total desperation and absolute miserable madness. The security personnel rushed forward, attempting to tackle him to the marble floor, but Derek violently shoved them away with a burst of frantic adrenaline. He stumbled directly onto the bright red carpet that stretched across the center of the room. The wealthy guests scrambled backward in sheer terror, shielding their expensive outfits from the filthy intruder. Derek aggressively scanned the massive ballroom, his crazed eyes darting past the sparkling chandeliers and the frightened attendees. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving as he frantically searched the expansive sea of unfamiliar faces for the one woman who had destroyed him. When his wild gaze finally landed on my central table, he froze entirely. He saw me sitting there in my spectacular designer gown, flanked by my powerful new business partner, and surrounded by immense success. The brutal contrast between my glorious triumph and his complete degradation was truly staggering. He fell to his knees right in the middle of the red carpet, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. His voice cracked with sheer agony and absolute humiliation as he began screaming my name at the top of his lungs, begging for mercy that I would absolutely never grant him. "You traded an empire for a lie, Derek." The words echoed through the massive ballroom, amplified by the reporter's microphone I held firmly in my hand. The absolute silence that fell over the Fortune 500 gala was deafening. Hundreds of the most powerful corporate executives, billionaire investors, and elite socialites stopped breathing, their eyes fixed entirely on the pathetic man kneeling on the red carpet. Camera flashes erupted like a violent lightning storm, illuminating the sweat pouring down Derek's desperate, ruined face. He looked absolutely wretched in his cheap, wrinkled gray suit. He reached a shaking hand toward the hem of my custom Christian Dior gown, but my private security guards instantly stepped forward, their massive frames blocking his path. "Do not dare touch me," I commanded, my voice slicing through the heavy air with surgical precision. "You came here tonight to play the victim in front of the press. You thought you could use the 8 years we spent married as emotional leverage to force me into saving you from the gutter. You thought my public reputation was a weakness you could exploit. You are spectacularly wrong." "Isabella, please," Derek sobbed, tears cutting tracks through the grease on his cheeks. "We built a beautiful life together. I was manipulated by your sister. Brittany fed my ego because she knew I was vulnerable. You know I always wanted a family. You know I desperately wanted children. I only looked elsewhere because you were completely barren." The collective gasp from the crowd was immediate. The reporters leaned in closer, their digital recorders thrust forward to capture the scandalous accusation. Derek was using his ultimate weapon, the fake infertility I had silently carried for nearly a decade, to paint himself as a tragic, heartbroken man seeking a family. I felt Terrence step up close behind me, his presence a solid wall of absolute support. I did not flinch. I did not show an ounce of shame. Instead, I smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile that made Derek visibly recoil. "You want to talk about biology in front of the international press?" I asked smoothly. "We can certainly do that." I gestured toward my chief of security, who immediately handed me a crisp manila folder. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Let us clear up this biological misunderstanding right now," I announced, holding the document high for the cameras. "This is an official medical record from your emergency surgery when you were 14 years old. It confirms that a severe infection rendered you 100% permanently sterile. You possess zero biological capacity to ever father a child." The brilliant flash of a dozen cameras captured the stark white paper. Derek opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like he had been physically struck. "I kept this horrific secret hidden to protect your fragile, toxic masculinity," I continued, ensuring my voice reached the very back of the grand ballroom. "Your mother, Patricia, begged me to take the blame for our empty nursery, so you would not feel like less of a man. I endured years of invasive fertility treatments and vicious country club gossip simply to shield your monumental ego. I gave you my wealth, my loyalty, and my total protection. In exchange, you proudly humiliated me, claiming you had miraculously impregnated my bankrupt sister. You destroyed your entire life for twin babies that actually belonged to a broke fitness trainer." The journalists frantically typed on their phones, instantly broadcasting the explosive scandal to the world. Derek knelt on the plush carpet, utterly destroyed. His grand plan to manipulate me had spectacularly backfired, exposing his deepest, most humiliating secret to the entire corporate elite. He had nothing left to leverage. His fake reality was permanently obliterated. "Please," Derek whispered, his voice completely broken. "I have absolutely nowhere to go. My bank accounts are empty. I am starving. Just give me enough money to disappear." I handed the microphone back to the stunned reporter. "You already took thousands of dollars from my corporate accounts to finance your disgusting affair," I stated coldly. "My legal team is currently seizing every single asset you possess to recover those stolen funds. You do not get a severance package for betrayal. You do not get a golden parachute. You get the exact amount of loyalty and respect you showed me. Zero." I turned my back on him. "Security," I commanded without looking over my shoulder. "Remove this trespasser from my property immediately. If he resists, have local law enforcement arrest him for corporate espionage and public harassment." The two massive guards grabbed Derek by his shoulders, hauling his limp, defeated body off the ground. He did not fight back. He simply hung his head, sobbing uncontrollably, as they dragged him backward down the long red carpet. The wealthy guest openly sneered at him, parting like the Red Sea to let the human garbage pass through. The heavy mahogany doors slammed shut, sealing him out in the cold, unforgiving night. He was permanently exiled from the world of power and privilege. I turned my attention back to the glittering ballroom. The flashing cameras had stopped, replaced by a wave of profound, respectful silence. I looked at Terrence, who offered a brilliant, approving nod. I smoothed the front of my emerald designer gown and raised my chin. The elite socialites and powerful investors immediately swarmed forward again, their admiration amplified 1,000 times over. They had just witnessed a masterclass in absolute dominance. I had not just survived a devastating betrayal, I had completely conquered it. I took a fresh glass of imported champagne from a passing waiter and raised it high. The entire room raised their glasses in unison. The past was completely eradicated, and my magnificent empire was finally mine to rule entirely alone forever. This was the absolute pinnacle of my entire existence. The ultimate justice had been delivered, and I would spend every remaining day enjoying my truly triumphant victory. "You traded an empire for a lie, Derek." I repeated the words slowly, letting their absolute weight crush the remaining air out of his lungs. The silence in the massive ballroom was absolute, broken only by the continuous blinding flashes of camera lenses capturing his total degradation. I stepped closer to him, the emerald silk of my custom Dior gown brushing against the filthy knees of his wrinkled suit. I held the microphone with total authority, turning my gaze from his pathetic face to the sea of reporters eagerly recording every single syllable. Let me explain the exact magnitude of his sheer stupidity to the world, I announced, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. This man did not just throw away an 8-year marriage to a fiercely loyal woman. He actively chose to commit federal corporate fraud to finance his pathetic delusions. While he was proudly parading his pregnant mistress around town, he was aggressively embezzling thousands of dollars from his employer. He used a corporate credit card to pay for luxury boutique hotel suites and expensive champagne, entirely unaware that I had already orchestrated a massive buyout of his parent company. He was literally stealing my money to cheat on me. A collective gasp ripped through the crowd of elite billionaires and powerful executives. They leaned in closer, their eyes wide with absolute morbid fascination. Derek remained frozen on his knees, his jaw trembling violently as the terrifying reality of his public exposure finally registered in his hollow brain. But the embezzlement is not even the most spectacular failure, I continued, relentlessly pacing a slow, deliberate circle around his kneeling form. The ultimate tragedy is his profound biological ignorance. He stood on a stage at a country club baby shower, loudly mocking my supposed infertility in front of 50 esteemed guests. He demanded I surrender my $3 million estate to provide a luxurious home for his unborn twins. Yet he is the one who is completely, permanently sterile. I pulled the medical records from the folder and held them up for the cameras to clearly document. A severe childhood infection completely eradicated his capacity to father children. He threw away a billionaire wife who silently protected his fragile, toxic masculinity for nearly a decade, all for a bankrupt mistress carrying a 22-year-old fitness trainer's babies. The reaction from the high society crowd was instantaneous and utterly brutal. The same elite socialites who had attended that horrific baby shower, the very people who had once whispered cruel gossip behind my back, now turned their collective viciousness entirely onto Derek. A harsh, mocking laugh erupted from a prominent venture capitalist standing near the front row. The laughter spread like a rapid wildfire across the glittering ballroom. Elegant women in designer gowns covered their mouths, giggling loudly at his staggering foolishness. Powerful corporate titans pointed fingers at him, shaking their heads in pure, unadulterated disgust. They were treating him exactly how he had treated me. The vicious cycle was finally complete. The utter humiliation he had intentionally inflicted upon me was now raining down upon his own head 1,000 times harder. Derek squeezed his bloodshot eyes shut, raising his trembling hands to cover his ears, as the deafening sound of elite mockery completely surrounded him. He was a broken, pathetic shell of a man drowning in a massive ocean of his own catastrophic mistakes. He had absolutely nothing left, to leverage, zero assets to claim, and no dignity remaining. "Isabella, please!" Derek wailed, dropping his hands from his ears and reaching frantically toward my shoes again. "I am begging you. I have zero money for a hotel. My mother kicked me out of her miserable apartment. I cannot even get a job as a basic warehouse worker because you blacklisted me across the entire logistics industry. Just give me another chance. I will do anything you want. I will be your servant. Just do not leave me completely destitute in the street." I looked down at him, feeling absolutely zero pity. The woman who would have rushed to comfort him, who would have blindly opened her wallet to fix his problems, had been permanently eradicated the moment he proudly announced his infidelity. "You made your incredibly stupid choices, Derek," I stated coldly, dropping the medical records directly onto his sweaty face. "You chose a shallow gold digger over a loyal partner. You chose corporate theft over hard work. You chose to violently humiliate me instead of appreciating my massive sacrifices. You thought you were an untouchable king, but you are nothing but a weak, pathetic parasite who finally killed his only host." I handed the heavy black microphone right back to the stunned reporter and turned my back on my former husband. The flashing cameras continued to capture the absolute contrast between us. I was a triumphant self-made billionaire, standing in a custom Dior gown alongside my brilliant new business partner, Terrence. We were preparing to dominate the global medical technology market, ready to build an unstoppable empire completely free from the toxic anchors of our miserable past. Derek was just a permanently sterile, completely bankrupt, publicly humiliated fraud kneeling on a red carpet in a cheap, wrinkled suit. He was now entirely broke, universally despised, and completely, utterly alone. The sheer perfection of this ultimate revenge tasted much sweeter than the finest vintage champagne. I did not need to say another word to him. The absolute destruction of his entire pathetic existence was perfectly complete. I slowly raised my right hand high into the air, keeping my posture razor sharp and my expression dangerously calm. I looked directly at the massive security guards waiting patiently by the grand mahogany doors. I simply snapped my manicured fingers. The highly trained private security guards immediately marched forward, aggressively grabbed Derek physically by his filthy collar and brutally dragged him out of the incredibly luxurious venue as he wailed endlessly into the dark, cold, unforgiving night. Exactly 3 months had passed since Derek's pathetic wails faded into that dark, cold, unforgiving night. The glittering world of high society corporate takeovers and million-dollar estates had entirely vanished from Brittany's reality. The universe had violently corrected itself, restoring absolute balance by stripping away every fraudulent luxury she had ever stolen. Her new kingdom was not a sprawling suburban mansion or a lavish country club. It was a greasy, poorly ventilated fast food drive-through located off a decaying interstate exit. The suffocating smell of stale frying oil clung permanently to her skin, embedding itself deep into the cheap polyester fabric of her bright orange uniform. She stood behind the scratched plexiglass window, her posture completely slouched, staring blankly at the cracked asphalt outside. The glamorous socialite who once spent thousands of dollars on designer maternity dresses was entirely gone. In her place stood a thoroughly defeated, exhausted woman who looked a decade older than her actual age. Heavy dark purple bags hung beneath her bloodshot eyes, a testament to endless sleepless nights. Her previously immaculate blonde hair was currently tied back in a messy, grease-stained bun, hidden beneath a humiliating branded visor. Her manicured nails, once her absolute pride, were now chipped, cracked, and burned from the industrial fryers. The physical and emotional toll of delivering twin boys and raising them entirely alone in a cramped, mold-infested studio apartment had completely ravaged her body and crushed her arrogant spirit. The headset clamped over her ear emitted a sharp, continuous beep signaling another incoming vehicle. Brittany mechanically pressed the blinking button, forcing a painfully fake, high-pitched customer service greeting past her cracked lips. She took the order for 2 double cheeseburgers and a large soda, her brain calculating the meager cost. That single cheap meal was the exact price of a small pack of generic diapers. She spent every waking moment performing this miserable mental math. She was drowning in massive, insurmountable debt. The $150,000 fraud judgment Terrence had successfully leveled against her loomed over her existence like a financial guillotine garnishing her already pathetic wages. Her parents, Richard and Catherine, had entirely cut her off after their own humiliating eviction, leaving her completely stranded. The broke fitness trainer had officially blocked her number, and Derek was practically living on the streets. She had nobody to manipulate, nobody to steal from, and absolutely no safety net remaining. Every single penny she scraped together, working grueling double shifts, went directly to infant formula, cheap diapers, and past due utility bills. She turned away from the drive-through window to wipe down the sticky stainless steel prep counter. A previous customer had hastily abandoned a glossy business magazine near the napkin dispenser. Brittany aggressively sprayed the harsh chemical cleaner across the surface, intending to sweep the trash into the overflowing garbage bin. As she reached for the magazine, her grease-stained fingers suddenly froze. The bright overhead fluorescent lights glared harshly against the glossy cover, illuminating a full-page professionally shot photograph that completely stopped her heart. Staring confidently back at her was Isabella. Her older sister looked absolutely radiant, possessing an aura of sheer untouchable dominance. She was wearing a razor-sharp, custom-tailored ivory suit, sitting powerfully at the head of a sleek glass boardroom table. The bold black headline stretched across the top of the magazine cover. The new queens of tech, Isabella merges logistics empire with revolutionary medical startup. The article prominently detailed her massive multi-billion-dollar venture, cementing her status as one of the most powerful and ruthless chief executive officers in the entire country. Brittany stared at the image, her chest constricting with a violent mixture of pure envy and agonizing regret. She had foolishly believed she was outsmarting her sister. She thought stealing Derek would guarantee her a lifetime of limitless luxury. Instead, she had thrown away a secure, wealthy marriage for a sterile fraud, while Isabella had transformed a horrific betrayal into an unstoppable international corporate empire. The staggering contrast between their two lives was almost too much to bear. Isabella was conquering the global financial markets, commanding boardrooms, and building generational wealth. Brittany was scrubbing congealed ketchup off a cheap counter just to keep her lights on. A loud demanding chime echoed from the drive-through sensor, violently snapping Brittany back to her miserable reality. She quickly shoved the glossy magazine into the trash can, desperate to hide the evidence of her colossal failure, and rushed back to the sliding service window. A sleek vehicle had just pulled up to the final payment collection point. It was not a rusted sedan or a noisy pickup truck. It was a pristine, brand-new midnight black Aston Martin. The low, powerful purr of its custom engine vibrated against the thin walls of the fast food restaurant. The tinted driver's side window smoothly glided down, revealing the customer inside. Brittany felt the remaining oxygen violently evacuate her lungs. Sitting comfortably behind the leather-wrapped steering wheel, looking immaculate, in a tailored charcoal suit and an expensive silver watch, was Terrence. The brilliant orthopedic surgeon radiated absolute success and unbothered peace. He did not look visibly angry. He did not look slightly vindictive. He simply looked right through her, exactly as one would look at a random, insignificant employee. He calmly handed her a crisp $20 bill to pay for his simple black coffee. Brittany stood completely paralyzed, her hands trembling violently as she accepted the cash. She mechanically counted out $19 in change and pushed the paper cups through the window. Terrence accepted his beverage, letting the $19 fall onto the stainless steel ledge. Without breaking eye contact, he slowly picked up a single crumpled $1 bill from the pile and deliberately dropped it directly into her empty grease-stained plastic tip jar. "Keep the change," Brittany, Terrence said coldly, rolling up his tinted window and driving away into the distance. Exactly 3 miles away from that greasy drive-through window, another miserable reality was aggressively playing out inside a cramped, incredibly damp basement apartment. The oppressive smell of cheap instant noodles and rotting mildew hung heavily in the stagnant air. Water constantly dripped from a rusted exposed pipe overhead, landing with a sharp, irritating rhythm into a stained plastic bucket. This miserable subterranean concrete box was officially the end of the line for the once incredibly arrogant mother and her ruined son. Patricia sat on a sagging, heavily stained thrift store mattress that doubled as their only seating area. She aggressively stirred a boiling cup of sodium-filled instant ramen with a cheap plastic spoon. The loud scraping sound echoed against the cold concrete walls, grating directly against Derek's raw, exhausted nerves. She was wearing a faded, deeply wrinkled cashmere sweater that had miraculously survived the brutal eviction from her luxury townhome. Her formerly pristine, heavily manicured nails were currently chipped, broken, and stained with dirt from hauling trash bags full of their remaining meager possessions across the entire unforgiving urban city. "I cannot believe we are eating this processed garbage again," Patricia shrieked violently, throwing the plastic spoon against the damp wall. Her shrill voice vibrated painfully inside the small, claustrophobic space. "We were highly respected members of the Oak Ridge Country Club just 6 months ago, Derek. I used to dine on imported caviar and drink authentic vintage champagne every single weekend. The club president used to personally greet me at the grand entrance. Now I'm trapped in a disgusting, moldy basement eating food designed for absolute peasants. This entire nightmare is completely your fault. You ruined us both forever." Derek did not even flinch at her aggressive outburst. He sat completely motionless on an overturned plastic milk crate in the dark corner of the room. He wore the exact same wrinkled, heavily stained gray suit he had worn when Isabella's private security team brutally dragged him off the Fortune 500 gala red carpet. He looked like an absolute walking corpse. His face was hollow, his eyes were bloodshot, and a thick, greasy beard covered his once impeccably shaved jawline. He simply stared blankly at the peeling yellow paint on the opposite wall, completely ignoring his mother's endless verbal whining. His mind was completely trapped in a relentless, agonizing loop of his own spectacular failure. He was constantly haunted by the unbelievable luxury he had so foolishly thrown away. He vividly remembered the soft, expensive leather seats of his repossessed Mercedes. He remembered the sprawling $3 million mansion with the pristine swimming pool he used to proudly call home. He remembered the massive executive mahogany desk where he briefly tasted true corporate power. He had willingly traded an entire billionaire empire, a fiercely loyal wife, and unlimited financial security for a deceitful, bankrupt woman carrying another poor man's babies. "Are you even listening to me?" Patricia shrieked again, aggressively, kicking his plastic milk crate with her worn-out designer shoe. "I am talking to you, Derek. You need to get up right now and find a job. You need to fix this massive disaster immediately. I cannot survive another single night sleeping in this toxic, disgusting basement. My lungs are literally filling with dangerous black mold. You need to go back to Isabella, get down on your hands and knees, and beg her for absolute forgiveness. Tell her you were temporarily insane. Do whatever she commands you to do." Derek finally blinked, pulling his empty gaze away from the yellow wall. He looked at his mother with a mixture of profound exhaustion and deep, simmering hatred. The toxic dynamic between them had finally trapped them together in this subterranean prison with absolutely zero hope of escape. She had spent his entire life inflating his massive ego, convincing him he was a golden corporate god who deserved endless worship. Now that his illusion of superiority had violently imploded, she offered absolutely nothing but vicious complaints. She was perfectly content to watch him suffer as long as she suffered alongside him. "Isabella is completely gone." Derek rasped, his voice sounding like dry, crushed gravel. "She is never taking me back, Mom. She publicly destroyed my entire life on international television. She permanently blacklisted me across the entire corporate logistics industry. No reputable company will ever hire a disgraced, bankrupt executive who was fired for severe fraud. You need to completely abandon your pathetic country club delusions. We have absolutely zero money left. We are completely destitute. We are never returning to that beautiful mansion. You are going to die in this miserable basement, and I am going to die right here." Before Patricia could launch into another screaming fit of entitled maternal rage, a heavy, rapid knocking echoed violently from the small wooden door at the top of the concrete basement stairwell. Derek slowly turned his head, his heart pounding a frantic, terrifying rhythm against his bruised ribs. He slowly stood up from the overturned milk crate, his knees aching from the damp cold. He dragged his heavy, exhausted legs up the steep concrete steps and cautiously opened the heavy door. A tired, bored postal worker stood on the cracked sidewalk holding a thick, highly official envelope requiring an immediate signature. Derek scribbled his name with a trembling hand and aggressively ripped the heavy envelope open the second the postal worker walked away. He pulled out a thick stack of terrifyingly severe federal documents. The bold, undeniable logo of the Internal Revenue Service was proudly stamped across the top page. His bloodshot eyes darted frantically across the dense legal text, his breathing growing incredibly shallow and rapid. Isabella's ruthless legal team had officially reported every single dollar of the corporate funds he had illegally embezzled to spend on Brittany as highly taxable, completely unreported personal income. He owed massive back taxes. While Derek sat trembling in that damp basement staring at the terrifying federal tax penalty that would officially ruin his miserable life forever, I was standing inside my spectacular corner penthouse office. The massive floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the entire sparkling city skyline. The morning sun illuminated the expensive Italian marble floors and the sleek modern furniture. There were no rusted pipes leaking dirty water above my head. There was absolutely no lingering smell of cheap instant noodles or rotting mildew. I was completely surrounded by the magnificent rewards of my relentless hard work. My highly professional executive assistant knocked softly on the heavy mahogany door before entering the quiet room. She was holding a single piece of mail. It was a wrinkled envelope made of cheap paper. It looked entirely out of place inside my pristine corporate sanctuary. She placed it squarely on my polished desk. She informed me that it had somehow bypassed the standard corporate mail sorting facility because it was flagged as highly personal urgent correspondence. I stared down at the messy ink scrawled across the front. I immediately recognized the chaotic handwriting. It officially belonged to my toxic mother. I picked up the envelope and slowly opened it. I pulled out a single sheet of lined notebook paper. The page was heavily stained with dried tears and smudged ink. Richard and Catherine had obviously written this pathetic message in a state of absolute desperation. They were completely permanently banned from my corporate properties. They were permanently banned from calling my phone. They had absolutely zero money remaining to hire a lawyer to fight their legal eviction. This pathetic physical letter was their very last available method to desperately attempt to extract any remaining financial support directly out of me. I began to read the rambling paragraphs they had frantically written. The letter started with a highly dramatic apology. They claimed they had made terrible mistakes and were completely heartbroken by the massive distance between us. They swore they had learned their lesson after facing such extreme financial hardships over the past 3 months. They were currently living inside a tiny, miserable apartment located in a very dangerous neighborhood. They literally begged me to just grant them one single short phone call so we could finally heal the family. They desperately wanted me to completely forgive their horrific past betrayals. I scoffed loudly as I carefully analyzed the subtle manipulative language hidden within their emotional plea. They deliberately used words designed to make me feel overwhelmingly guilty for my tremendous success. They wrote that a truly good daughter would never abandon her poor aging parents in their greatest time of desperate need. They completely ignored the undeniable fact that they had actively encouraged my younger sister to steal my cheating husband. They completely ignored the horrific reality that they had happily spent my entire adult life trying to ruthlessly drain my massive bank accounts to continuously fund their precious Brittany. My mind instantly replayed the incredibly satisfying memory of Richard and Catherine forcefully packing all of her expensive belongings into ugly black garbage bags. They had ruthlessly thrown their absolute favorite golden child completely out onto the wet grass, the exact second she lost her fraudulent access to my infinite wealth. They did not actually care about familial loyalty or maintaining genuine unconditional love. They were vicious, greedy parasites who only cared about securing a comfortable luxury lifestyle. They only wanted to miraculously heal the broken family because they desperately needed me to immediately pay their overdue monthly apartment rent. I looked down at the second paragraph of the letter where Catherine had attempted to pull hard at my non-existent heartstrings. She wrote that she constantly thought about me every single day. She claimed she frequently cried herself to sleep while remembering my innocent childhood face. She stated that Richard was experiencing severe health issues directly caused by the extreme stress of our current estrangement. They were trying to completely gaslight me into believing I was the cruel villain who was actively murdering my own elderly parents by refusing to simply open up my massive corporate checkbook today for them. If they genuinely believed those transparent manipulative tactics would miraculously work on me, they were profoundly delusional. I was no longer the desperate daughter who constantly craved their basic maternal affection. I was an untouchable billionaire executive who executed hostile corporate takeovers before enjoying my morning coffee. My emotional vulnerabilities had been surgically removed and permanently replaced with impenetrable armor. Their pathetic handwritten words meant absolutely nothing to me anymore. Their tears were just salty water. Their desperate apologies were entirely meaningless noise echoing from a distant past that I had already completely conquered, successfully buried, and joyfully forgotten forever. I ran my manicured fingers over the wrinkled edge of the cheap notebook paper. I felt a tremendous surge of absolute power washing over my entire body. I slowly stood up from my luxurious ergonomic leather chair and walked deliberately across the expansive office. I stopped directly in front of my heavy-duty industrial paper shredder. I pressed the sleek silver button on the top panel. The machine instantly purred to life with a quiet, continuous hum. I held the pathetic apology letter directly over the narrow metal slot. I stared at the chaotic handwriting one final triumphant time today. I released my grip completely. The sharp steel blades violently grabbed the paper and aggressively pulled it downward. I watched the frantic words slice into completely illegible ribbons. The fake apologies, the desperate manipulation, and the toxic history were all violently shredded into tiny white pieces. The machine safely deposited the shredded confetti into the dark collection bin below. My toxic family was now entirely eliminated from my magnificent universe. I turned my back on the shredder, walked confidently toward my desk, and smiled brightly. I finally had absolute perfect peace. I had secured the ultimate sweet, glorious victory today. The heavy oak doors of the executive boardroom closed with a satisfying final click. I sat at the head of a massive polished glass table, a custom platinum fountain pen resting lightly between my manicured fingers. Terrence sat directly to my right, projecting the calm surgical precision that had defined his entire career. Across from us sat three senior venture capitalists from the aggressive equity firm in the country. They were not looking at me with the thinly veiled condescension I used to endure during miserable family dinners. They were looking at me with pure respect. The thick stack of legal documents resting on the glass surface represented the official merger of my logistics empire with Terrence's robotic surgical startup. It was a massive multi-billion-dollar contract that would immediately dominate the global medical technology market. I did not hesitate. I did not look back. I smoothly pressed the platinum nib against the heavy paper and signed my name with absolute authority. Terrence mirrored my action, his signature sealing our unstoppable new partnership. The lead investor exhaled sharply, a sound of profound relief and eager anticipation before reaching out to shake my hand. We had officially secured the future. The venture capitalists departed shortly after the signing, leaving Terrence and me alone in the expansive sunlit boardroom. The silence they left behind was not heavy or oppressive. It was the crisp, clean silence of absolute victory. Terrence walked over to a custom mahogany wet bar, discreetly built into the far wall. He pulled out a bottle of imported vintage French champagne that cost more than Derek's pathetic monthly hotel bill. The cork popped with a sharp, loud, celebratory crack that echoed beautifully off the high ceilings. Terrence poured the golden liquid into two tall crystal flutes, the bubbles catching the afternoon light. He walked back to the glass table and handed me a flute, his dark eyes shining with genuine, unburdened satisfaction. We raised our glasses high, the crystal clinking with a delicate musical ring. We toasted to our mutual freedom. We toasted to the complete, permanent eradication of the parasites who had desperately tried to drain our resources, our energy, and our spirits. The champagne tasted incredibly sweet, completely devoid of the bitter aftertaste of betrayal. We were standing at the absolute pinnacle of the corporate world, entirely unencumbered by the deceitful anchors of our miserable past lives. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the expensive champagne, letting the cool liquid soothe my throat. I looked at Terrence, appreciating the immense quiet strength he exuded. We had both survived a relentless onslaught of manipulation, deceit, and profound disrespect. My toxic family had spent 30 years treating me like a disposable banking machine, actively celebrating my pain while aggressively funding their golden child. Derek had spent 8 years feeding off my loyalty, aggressively masking his own permanent biological failures by publicly tearing down my self-worth. Brittany had ruthlessly attempted to steal an empire she lacked the basic intelligence to maintain. They all believed that my quiet endurance was a permanent condition. They genuinely thought I would always be the accommodating victim, the silent martyr who would absorb their cruel abuse to keep the peace. They mistook my profound patience for crippling weakness. They completely failed to understand the fundamental mechanics of my ambition. Taking the high road never meant surrendering my power, It never meant offering endless pathetic forgiveness to people who actively plotted my destruction. Taking the high road simply meant securing my assets, gathering my irrefutable evidence, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Terence smiled, leaning back against the edge of the glass table. He clearly understood that principle perfectly. He had methodically collected his financial evidence, quietly finalizing his massive fraud lawsuit, while Brittany was busy maxing out credit cards. He knew that true power did not require shouting or throwing tantrums in cheap motel rooms. True power was absolute, unyielding discipline. I walked slowly across the boardroom, my designer heels clicking with steady, rhythmic authority against the polished Italian marble floor. I reflected on the harsh, beautiful truth of my new reality. Being a good person does not mean allowing toxic people to endlessly trample over your dignity. It means establishing boundaries so massive, so incredibly impenetrable, that they instantly crush anyone foolish enough to try and cross them. I had severed the rotting branches of my family tree. I had permanently legally exiled my cheating husband to the gutter. I had successfully foreclosed on the stolen mansion and completely eradicated their fraudulent country club illusions. I had dismantled their entire fake universe, using nothing but absolute truth and overwhelming financial force. I did not shed a single tear for their self-inflicted misery. They had dug their own shallow graves. I reached the massive, pristine floor-to-ceiling window that spanned the entire length of the executive boardroom. The afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting brilliant streaks of gold, bright fierce orange and deep crimson across the sprawling city skyline. Thousands of buildings stretched out before me, a vast, complex network of power and opportunity that I now actively controlled. I looked down at the busy streets far below, completely detached from the chaotic, desperate scrambling of small, ordinary people. I took one final deeply lingering sip of the vintage champagne, letting the exquisite taste anchor me to this perfect moment of absolute triumph. The reflection staring back at me in the thick, heavy glass was entirely unrecognizable from the woman who had suffered in silence just a few short months ago. I was completely untouchable. I was a powerful sovereign queen standing at the very top of a magnificent, unshakable empire. I smiled, a cool, terrifying expression of pure, cold, unadulterated dominance. They thought my silence was weakness. They did not realize it was just the quiet before the guillotine dropped. I did not just survive the fire. I am the fire. The room slowly faded to black. The most profound lesson from this story is that true power does not require screaming or emotional outbursts. It demands unyielding discipline and absolute boundaries. Blood relations never excuse toxic behavior, and being a good person does not mean allowing greedy manipulators to drain your resources. When surrounded by deceit, whether from a cheating partner or entitled parents, the most effective response is cold, calculated removal. Never mistake quiet patience for crippling weakness. You must ruthlessly cut off the parasites in your life to protect your peace. Taking the high road simply means knowing your worth and securing your future. Share this story with someone who needs the courage to set firm boundaries and reclaim their own power today.